All right. Como no? I had to turn up the mic a bit. The issue with turn it up, right? There you go. Listen, I am very fortunate. While I don't live in a West Hollywood mansion, I didn't grow up in Beverly Hills, whatever the case, we left, the hood, the barrio, whatever you want to call it, the ghetto. I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be here if we had stayed in that environment because I was and am a bit of a hothead with a fucking boulder on my shoulder. It's a nice boulder. Pero a veces, sometimes la gente around the neighborhood, you know, this nicer part of the city, I would say nicer, others would disagree, but I feel very fortunate growing up around this area. So I'm not sure if y'all can hear it, if it's coming through the mic or not, but hay una fiesta that I was not invited to. The neighbors get down. We appreciate it. It'd be nice to have a little. It's on the opposite side of the black block, so it's like whatever. But I know they got good food. Si gastan tanto para la banda, they spent that much, for a live band. Do you know the food's fucking good? So I hope that's not too much of a distraction, especially considering the fact that some good jams, some not so good news. But we're gonna do what we can. I'm gonna try to keep this one a little bit tighter. Let's be more efficient, brevity and all. But I can't make any promises. I ramble. I'm a rambler. All right. So let's get right to it. The lineup, the rundown. We're going to go over Bernard Sanders. Just epitome and beautiful example of liberal Zionism and how they could just throw words out there and ramble, right? Sound like they actually care. But fundamentally, whether it's up front or at the end, they're Zionists. They defend and support and advocate for the existence of Israel on Palestinian land. I've said it once, I'll say it again. Those anti Semitic charges, toss them at somebody else because the reality is I do support the existence of a state of Israel. Drum roll. I don't have that technology yet. In Europe. In Europe. Preferably in Germany. But not on Palestinian land. You cannot go out and colonize indigenous people in their land. Go ahead, you know, set set up your state, whatever you want to do with it, however you want to do it, set it up in Europe. Make the Europeans pay for everything they've made, all the horrors and atrocities that they've placed upon your people. And this is all before the Holocaust, right? If the Holocaust never happened, Europe is still fundamentally the most anti Semitic, anti Jewish region in the world. Don't let them trick you. The same way that white people like to tell you that it's actually black people who are the most homophobic. It's actually brown people who are the most conservative, right? The way that they want to make it seem like Asian people are the most racist. It's never them. It's never them. Also, now they want to say that it's Arabs that are the most anti Semitic. No, 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 no. Look into the history, look at the pogroms in Europe, endlessly vilifying the Jewish people. Hitler did nothing new. Let's be very clear about that. Hitler did nothing new. Europe has been doing that to its fellow European Jewish people for a long time now, prior to World War II. The difference was it was an industrial extermination, right? Technology had advanced to such a point that these horrors and atrocities could be like mainlined. It's chilling to talk about it in such a mechanical manner. It's very reminiscent to when you really want to talk about African Americans and chattel slavery. You have to acknowledge the fact that Europeans saw them as nothing more than beasts of burden. Europeans have viewed, and continue to view Jewish Europeans as vermin. We've seen how the Nazis described them as such. That wasn't unique to Germany. That wasn't unique to Nazi Germany. That was the sentiment amongst Europe. How do a prime example of that, how we know that, is that the rest of Europe really didn't bother to get involved until Hitler started expanding. And so you started seeing the internal colonization of Europe through Nazi Germany. That's when it became an issue. And in order to, rile up people, especially here in the States, because you have to remember the American citizenry, excuse me, they did not want to get involved in World War II. They didn't even want to take Jewish refugees. So, both in the States and in Europe, it was never about saving the Jewish people. Anti Semitism runs hard and deep in Europe, and that extends to the United States. That being said, we're going to go through Bernie's speech. A lot of it's fluff, especially the tail end. I think around the 50-second mark. Everything else he says after that is basically irrelevant. After that, we're going to examine the Electric Antifada put out a great article on Biden's aid to Palestine, right? As he's funding and supporting the genocide of Palestinians. We're going to look at Sam Seder on the Majority Report, the supposed pillar of the left online space, the whitest show on the internet. We're going to see how he willingly spreads a Zionist historical propaganda. Just right out in the open. The charismatic Emma Vigeland and Sam Seder's best friend, his leftist attack dog, Matt Leck. Don't bother to correct them. Don't bother to call them out. That's their boss at the end of the day. So, we're going to look at not just how Sam Seder lies about the history and the origins of Zionism, which makes him, at the very least, if you want to be gracious to him, a liberal Zionist. But we'll show how none other, again, like and subscribe, and I will get that candle, our white savior, the saint himself, Michael Brooks, the saint of the left. If y'all like and subscribe, I will buy a candle with Michael Brooks' face on it, descending from the heavens. But Michael Brooks himself on his show dispels and reveals like the fact that what Sam Cedar is doing is spreading Zionist propaganda. Now, this was back in 2019. There is no excuse. Sam Cedar has been doing this for how long? Over 2 decades? And he's still spreading Zionist propaganda about the histories and the origins of Zionism? There's no excuse. There's absolutely no excuse. We're going to go back after that to the Electronic Antifada and go through the article on media and propaganda. The reason I'm sandwiching this now, opposed to before, where we would read the articles throughout, we would look at the videos throughout the video, but never sandwich through like this. The reason I want to do is because after the last stream, which I can understand how somebody might look at that stream and be like, oh, he's just clout chasing, going after all these white leftists. But for me, it really is about, and I continue to repeat it in that last stream, this is a propaganda war. And the fact that these white leftists are losing it, conceding it, not even fighting back. And when they do, it's just to line their pockets because their actions will not reflect their rhetoric. Hasan Piker crying next to Ethan Klein, a devout Zionist, while chatting it up with Ela Klein, who's an IDF veteran, a war criminal. All right. On that note, after the article, we're going to look through Hasan Piker's lackluster appearance on Piers Morgan. Keep in mind, Piers Morgan has been getting bodied by pro-Palestinian voices from different areas, right? Different approaches to combating Piers Morgan and the mainstream Zionist propaganda. It's been amazing to watch. It's been frustrating, anxiety inducing, but at the very least, a great example of how to combat Zionist propaganda, especially the liberal kind or the hands off kind, the quote unquote neutral kind that Piers Morgan attempts to portray. Even with all that, Hassan falls just like that, falls face first in this appearance. Why is that? Because he doesn't really care. He doesn't really believe in any of this. If you were truly anti-Zionist, if you were truly an ally of Palestinians, you would not go into business with the Zionists, Ethan Klein. You would not go into business with a former IDF soldier, Ela Klein. The Ela. So, of course, when it's time to come up to bat, there's nothing there. There's no sauce. All right. So, we're going to look through that. And then we're going to wrap it up with, we're going to go through a section of a chapter of a great book. I think we should definitely be examining not only the origins of Zionism, despite what Sam Cedar might think they are. Not only should we be analyzing the way that Israel itself has ethnically cleansed the land of Palestinians, but we should be examining the enemy. And this is why I want to go over this section of the chapter of An Army Like No Other. This book examines the origins, the function, and the way that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, operates. That's crucial because we talk about the IDF. We know the atrocities that they commit, but we don't really know their history specifically, right? Alongside the Zionist colonization of Palestine. So how does their military branch, how did it come to be and how does it operate? So we'll go through a section of their origin, which this is why you have to label Sam Seder at the very least a liberal Zionist because the history is there. The man's been doing it for over 2 decades. Now he's rambling and stuttering, looking like a fool. Can't go through a single episode without asking a question that involves well come on. This isn't that difficult. This isn't that difficult. I encourage any non-white person to fucking start streaming because the majority of the report looks fancy and all, but the man could do it from his fucking living room. It's just that ego, the need to feel important, is the reason why he needs a studio. But he's nothing but a liberal Zionist because I'm telling you, I've spoken to people who, high school friends, people I've known, not politically engaged at all. And they're they're on the right side of this. Because all it takes is for you to Google something, crack open a book, and it's simple to understand. It's colonization. It's not complicated. I get really frustrated when people start overemphasizing the religious aspect of this. Cuando hablamos, when we talk about colonization of the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, Turtle Island, whatever makes you feel comfortable, we don't talk about the conquistadors as spreading Catholicism. We don't talk about the Protestants as spreading Christianity or Protestantism. No, we talk about their thirst for land and resources and either the extermination of the indigenous population or the extermination and the enslavement. But we've been allowed to buy into the Zionist propaganda that somehow this is a holy war. This is a religious conflict. It is not. That is the illusion. That is the distraction that they put forth. It is very simple. It is colonization. It is literally despite again what Sam Seder might say, the liberal pillar, Sam Seder, doing this for over 2 decades, despite his lies about Zionism. It was simply to colonize. It was simply to provide a specific segment of Europeans a land for themselves, right? A nation to reflect their wants, their needs, and their desires. Don't want to make it more complicated. It isn't. When you begin to censor religion, Judaism, into the conversation of Zionism, you're doing what a Zionist wants you to do, which is to conflate Zionism and Judaism. Please don't fall into that trap. Don't fall into that game. Fuck that. All right. So let's get started. Listen, I was only 10 minutes late, 8 minutes late, the earliest I've ever been. CPT time all day. I'm working on it. And it only took me about 19, 20 minutes to go through the rundown. We're improving. That's the point. We're improving. Slowly but surely. Que dicen, soy pendejo, pero no tan pendejo, right? Like, I have room for improvement and I could get there. I swear. Yo, I have a double tomorrow. And to all the fucking blue collar workers, none of these trust fund babies, none of these Beverly Hills, West Hollywood guys. Double is fucking cake for y'all. My dumbass is gonna get maybe 4 hours of sleep and gonna do a 16. I try to avoid them, but when you have to be poor, you have to work. All right. So much for being concise. So let's hear our leftist icon, a revolutionary leader. What was it? Not me, but us? Fuck out of here. Let's see. At this point, even if you believe it's morally wrong for Zionists to occupy Palestine, it's pretty much too late for the international community to advise Israel to move anywhere else. They have their claws dug too deep. And nukes. Yeah, those nukes are dug in deep. Also, the Arab countries are sort of united with Palestinians, but not in a practical way. Well, just to break that down quickly, we'll start from the tail end there. The Arab countries are not aligned with Palestinians. At least the leadership is not. They have sold them out. Palestinians have spoken, very angrily and clear about this. They have been sold out by the rest of the Arab leadership in the surrounding countries. That being said, the Arab people are in complete support of Palestinian liberation. But unfortunately, their voices or their abilities, one can argue just like us here in the States, are not powerful or organized enough to change or to force the hand of their political leaders. Yeah, the fact that Israel has nukes, personally, I think Israel, much like the United States, if both Israel and the United States will, I think, personally, maybe I'm jaded to the point of no return. I try to hold revolutionary optimism, but if any true revolutionary change, especially considering indigenous movements, if they were ever to truly gain power to threaten the status quo, I would not be surprised if these colonial empires just set off a nuke within their borders. So yeah, I mean that's when I really get into a dark place, right? In order to avoid indigenous populations to gain power, I would not be surprised if Israel, the United States would use a nuke. They would rather self-destruct than to lose power. But it's not that it's morally wrong for Zionists. Like, I hate talking about morality and all this like philosophical fucking philosophy 101 bullshit. That's not what I'm here for. That's not who I am. Maybe I'm just not that intelligent. Sure. I'm not gonna pretend. I'm not gonna wear a fucking fedora and have a weird accent to try and compensate for my lack of intelligence or lack of work ethic, to truly understand and master these areas of study. But it's just, yeah, sure, if you want to call it morally wrong, fine. But for me, it's just very simple. To an invader, to colonizer, indigenous people should and have the right to oust them by any and all means necessary. And that, I guess, in my point of view, that means that any action they take is morally correct. But this idea that where would the European Jews go if you decolonize Palestine is irrelevant. I don't give a fuck. because you have Europe to go to. The same way that all these people fled during the military attack by Palestinian liberation forces on the 7th, the same way they headed for the airport using their, original passports to go back to the States or Europe or wherever they crawled out from, they could just simply do the same exact thing. But you have to have revolutionary optimism. I know I just went on my conspiracy theory about the nuke, but even with that in mind, even then it'd be worth it. Everything is worth liberation. Everything. What? All right, let's go. 25 minutes in. I wanted to keep this to an hour. And yet here we are. All right, let's hear it. From the revolutionary leader himself, Bernard Sanders. Let's hear it.
Madam President, I listened carefully to what Senator Scott and others have said about the barbarous act committed by Hamas against innocent men, women, and children, the mowing down by machine guns of young people who are doing nothing more than attending a dance, the murder of babies. This is an horrific act precipitating a worldwide crisis. And the United States of America, all of us, condemn this act. And in my view, the state of Israel has the absolute right to defend itself against Hamas and terrorism in general.
All right. That was 56 seconds in. Let's run it up to a minute, right? So this whole thing is 6 minutes, 25 seconds. Everything else after this statement that Israel has a right to defend itself is irrelevant. Because what you're saying by claiming that a colonial settled project has a right to quote unquote defend itself, you're saying that it has a right to exist, that it has a right to steal and occupy indigenous land, specifically here in this case, Palestinian land. In doing so, you're advocating for and supporting and legitimizing the theft by force of Palestinians' homes, of their resources, of their fucking lives. So he will go on for another minute and a half talking about how we need to send aid and encourage a ceasefire and all this bullshit. Why is it bullshit? Because the moment you say Israel has a right to defend itself, you have conceded the argument. You have legitimized and advocated for their existence on Palestinian land. So is it even worth going through everything else he's gonna say? Because you can make the argument, well, he needs to say that. Bernie needs to say that Israel has a right to defend itself. He needs to denounce the attacks, the military attack by Palestinian liberation forces. Anybody that just calls it Hamas terrorist attack is a Zionist. Why? Because it wasn't only Hamas. It wasn't only Hamas. To do so was to claim that it only was Hamas is to spread Zionist propaganda because their goal is, to create and have this giant boogeyman of terrorism, even if it was just Hamas. One, we do not denounce, not in this house. And two, we should support that because it would still be a liberation force. It might be one that we do not align with ideologically. That's too damn bad. We're not the ones being colonized by Zionists. We're not the ones being occupied by Zionists. We're not the ones being murdered by Zionists, having their land and homes stolen by Zionists. So any way that they choose to combat Zionism is justified, is legitimate, and should have our fucking support. Because until you're there in Gaza, the world's largest open air prison, until you're getting bombed, until your child is getting killed by an IDF soldier, until any of that is happening to you, and you're over here denouncing their freedom fighters, what you're doing is supporting their oppression, their subjugation, their colonization. It's that simple. They want to make it complicated. These liberals. In 1 minute, Bernie Sanders laid it all out. Israel has a right to exist on Palestinian land. Israel has a right to defend itself from the resistance of the indigenous people whose land and lives they're taking. So he's going to go on and say, hey, we need to provide aid for Palestinians. But see, if you're only providing aid and you're not supporting liberation, then what is the point? You're providing a band-aid for what exactly? A life-threatening injury, a life-threatening assault, a life-threatening attack. We're witnessing genocide being conducted by the Zionist government on Palestinians. And what does Bernie say? That they have a right to defend themselves? A colonizer is never defending themselves. Their presence, their existence on indigenous land is an attack on indigenous people, is aggression. They are never in a state of defensiveness. They are never the victim. Because that's what you're saying. When you're saying Israel has a right to defend yourself, what you're saying is that Israel was the victim. How is the colonizer, the abuser, the victim in this situation? They're not. They cannot be. By definition, they cannot be. It's not even worth hearing this motherfucker speak anymore after all the money he stole from 2 failed campaigns where he quit in both. He refused to grow a fucking spine. But I hope that just like many people, not even on the far left, just people that understand right from wrong, that see a genocide and denounce that, will not be voting for Joe Biden. I hope now we realize that individuals like Bernie Sanders, who, let's be very clear, Michael Parenti warned us about, Michael Parenti told us, no, like Bernie stopped talking to me because I called him out for his support of Bill Clinton, because I called him out for his support in the bombing of Yugoslavia, right? So Bernie Sanders has always been a warmonger. He has always supported the empire, the United States empire, to kill and brutalize people. But he's over here denouncing the liberation fighters, the Palestinian liberation fighters. And how does he paint it? Innocent men. Well, let's be very clear. All men in Israel have been in the IDF. It's mandatory, right? You have people that have the courage to confront the very minimal consequences of denying service, which is the correct thing to do. The stigma of not joining the IDF is really the most harsh thing about it. Because whatever prison time they do is broken up. It's broken up, so it's not like a straight prison term. Come in and you come out. Until finally they say, you know what, whatever. Get the fuck out of our faces. So every man in Israel, every Zionist has been an IDF soldier. Or he's one of these parasitic Orthodox settlers. They're all settlers, doesn't matter, but these are Orthodox. And they refuse, for religious convenience, not to serve in the IDF. But they're still Zionists and they're still colonizers. And Bernie Sanders calling them innocent. Women. Women serve in the IDF. Hell, the IDF wants to paint itself, much like the US military, as progressive, as open. And much like the United States, its history does not reflect that. But because it is a colonial settler project, they need more bodies and they need to train their their the colonial citizenry. They need to train them and make sure that they're prepared to expand their region of control, their region of occupation. So the women are trained as well. And he brings up babies, right? Well, first he brings up like kids, like the youth dancing at a concert. He conveniently leaves out the fact that they're dancing and celebrating next to a concentration camp that they very much know exists and they understand what's going on in there and they applaud it. They applaud the environment and circumstances of despair that Palestinians find themselves in. They cheer it on. They celebrate next to it because these schools are promoting this. Exactly. Exactly. No evidence has been presented of innocent children being killed intentionally in the Palestinian liberation military action. How about that? We have reports from the Zionist settlers stating that it was the IDF who fired upon them. No, I rambled through it as well. Don't worry. But it's difficult. It's difficult talking about this appropriately because of all the propaganda that we're hit with. I've heard people that are on the right side of it still sometimes refer to it as a conflict as they're talking, right? Because it's insidious, especially liberal Zionism is insidious and it creeps into your vocabulary, into the way you think. This is what's happening with people advocating for a ceasefire. A ceasefire will not solve anything. A ceasefire, like Kwame Ture told us, defending the status quo is essentially wanting Palestinians to continue to be colonized in this cross-generational genocide. We have morons like Destiny saying, oh, well, actually, the population of Palestinians has grown under occupation, so it's not really a genocide. They conveniently leave out the fact that, the median age of a Palestinian is that of a child, right? So it's ridiculous how these liberals, defend genocide. Why do they do it? Well, because they see indigenous people standing up and fighting back, and they're nervous that might happen across the world. Worse in their countries. Can you imagine indigenous people here in the States and black people, those descendants of slavery, unite, organize, and begin to, like international law allows, to resist colonization by a government that does not represent them, a government that wants them in prison, trapped in open air prison reservations, the Uyghur population has increased, yet liberals will shout genocide without hesitation. Yeah, but even that, even that, and I was just having this conversation. Even that is giving them too much credit, because the way that China and yo, I'm never gonna get into this debate of is China socialist or not? Are they on the right track or not? They lift virtually their entire population out of poverty. I don't give a fuck whether or not they're following every word that Marx wrote down. You, all credit to them. All credit to them. But fuck them for supporting and working alongside Israel. I could hold both of those things, both those opinions at the same time. So let's let this motherfucker speak a little bit more.
No debate on that. But what I ask my colleagues to also consider is that while we fully appreciate the horrific attack by Hamas against innocent people of Israel,
real quick, there is no such thing as an innocent person of Israel. There is no such thing as an innocent person of Israel. They're all colonizers. Nat Turner did nothing wrong. The Haitian revolutionaries did nothing wrong. And Haiti has been paying for that ever since. Ever since. The white supremacist Western powers have made Haiti pay for that to this fucking day. And that's the shit that we have been seeing coming out of Gaza is heartbreaking. It's infuriating. And we should all keep in mind and stay informed about Haiti, because they're going to go through it again. Thankfully, I'm concerned that there's going to be an invasion of Haiti, a full on. All right. Let's stick to the topic, because I can admit that I still need to educate myself more on it. I have been just focused on Palestine and combating all this liberal Zionist propaganda. But it's all interconnected, right? The subjugation and the colonization of the global majority is prevalent across. And that's why our solidarity needs to be across borders. It must be international. So let's allow this comeback to go a little, just for a bit more, before we dive into why Biden's Gaza quote unquote aid is bullshit. Something that Biden here is essentially advocating for.
ask you also to understand that
Bernie here. Yo, they might as well be the same fucking person at this point, since Bernie just bends over for Biden, gets on his knees for him. Spineless motherfucker.
right now there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza who have lost their homes. They've been thrown out of their homes. They have no food, they have no water, they have no fuel. And I remind my colleagues that half of those people are children. Half of the people in Gaza are children. So yes, we are united in doing everything we can to destroy Hamas and their terrorism. But I implore you, do not take Hamas's inhumanity and brutality and terrorism against children who are 3 or 5 years old. I ask you to think for a moment. Think about it. I have a state, represent the state of Vermont, 630,000 people. 1 million people, most of them are poor. They got nothing to begin with. Before this whole business, Gaza was one of the most desperately poor places in the world. Youth unemployment, 75%. Many of their people dependent on the UN for basic survival. So what I'm asking people to take a look at is to understand what our country is about and what our country must not be involved in is making the horrific and miserable situation in Gaza even worse. Many of the families, and again, these are people thrown out of their homes. They don't know where they're going. They don't know who will accept them. They don't know if they're ever going back to their homes, and they're poor to begin with. And do we really want to deny those people aid from the UN and other agencies to feed the children, to provide water for them? Is that really what we are about? So, of course, it goes without saying that we've got to do everything that we can to make sure that not one nickel goes to the murderous Hamas organization. But at the same time, we have got to stand with the innocent women and children in Palestine who are suffering today and are facing an almost unprecedented modern humanitarian disaster.
Okay. I'm telling you, when I first heard this, past the first minute, I was like, I was feeling it. I was like, yes, he's making great points. I'm glad that he's there to voice these concerns. And that's how liberal Zionists get you. That's how liberals get you in general. Notice how he said the innocent women and children. Apparently, there are no innocent Palestinian men. They are all terrorists. They're all part of Hamas. Notice how what he's advocating for is UN aid to help these, essentially refugees. But he's not advocating to solve the actual issue, which is the dismantling of the Zionist colonial project. So they like to put a band-aid over these things. They like to put a veneer of problem solving. Meanwhile, people still die, but just not loud enough to make them uncomfortable. Not loud enough for people to organize around it and make them uncomfortable. The politicians. Especially those who have a leftist progressive marketing. Those that have that PR machine. The progressive PR machine behind them. So they need to say this. But within their message, it's very clear that they actually don't, that they're actually not as Norm Finkelstein, when he was banned from Israel and he was crying about it, he stated, I am not an enemy of Israel. A fucking coward. The guy who attacks BDS, the guy that supports a two-state solution, which for somebody who has read as much as he has, was never going to be a possibility. But you have to understand, like, the constant attack on Hamas is what he is saying. When liberals do this, attacking quote unquote Hamas, which is just any and all direct action by Palestinians against their occupiers, against their colonizers. When you start denouncing that, when you start saying we need to obliterate that, we need to remove that variable from this geopolitical equation, right? When you start doing that, what you're saying is we want to make sure that Palestinians have no way of actually resisting, of any substantial resistance. If they, Palestinians in Gaza had the March of Return, where they peacefully marched towards the fences that are encircling them, that are caging them inside Gaza. Peacefully marched towards them. The IDF, the Zionist government, were shooting them down. Children, women, handicapped individuals, they were shooting them down. That was okay. That was fine for these liberal politicians. They'll denounce Israel. They'll say, "Oh, they shouldn't do that," but they will not actually pass any bills or suggest any legislative action to prevent the funding of Israel, to dismantle Israel, right, on Palestinian land. But when Palestinians actually resist, when Palestinians fuck out of here with Hamas, it wasn't just Hamas, it was Palestinians collectively resist, directly take up arms, as many indigenous people have. When they do that, that's when these politicians come out and start flapping their fucking gums. If Palestinians die peacefully, oh shucks, that's too bad. But they're doing it the right way. If Palestinians refuse to lay down, refuse to go quietly into the night, that's when it's a fucking problem. That's when these politicians actually, quote unquote, do something, which is essentially just to fund Israel more. And we'll see why this whole fucking this aid that they're advertising, that the Biden administration and Bernard Sanders over here are pushing for. It's just a fucking facade. I'm telling you, liberal Zionism, just like liberalism, is insidious. Fuck hearing this food for another 2 minutes. And now if you're thinking you're fucking reaching. This is one of the few progressive leftist voices. One of the few progressive voices we have, please. We need to coalesce behind him and support him. Fuck that. The moment you say Israel has the right to defend itself, you're saying Israel has the right to conduct genocide of Palestinians. Don't believe the fucking propaganda behind it. I always say, like, it's not complicated. I'm not an intelligent individual. I'm a fucking loudmouth. I'm not over here with some fedora and a fucking weird ass voice to try and coerce an audience to believe I know all the fucking answers. No. I'm here broke as fuck with a fucking accent. Trying to learn and educate myself on these things the same way that I'm hoping you are trying to learn and educate yourself. To be just better informed, a better ally. The only quote unquote communist allowed on mainstream media, Zizek, has been calling for unconditional support for Israel. Listen, if you know, watch enough of my shit, you see that I have a stutter, that se me traba la lengua, right? My words get mixed up, that Spanglish kicks in. So I never got into Zizek, and this might be ableist. I'll take the fucking hit, but it wasn't even his takes or his like the saliva issue that he has. I don't know if it's like a large tongue or something. Again, I understand that it's ableist. I'll take the hit, but that's not even the fucking issue. I cannot stand European accents. I cannot. They sound fucking pretentious to me. And one like verbal fucking cliche that I hate is hearing and so on, or etc. etc. Maybe because I'm selfish and actually want to hear what you mean by so on and etc. etc. Because it might be something I don't know, and it might increase my knowledge of the topic that we're talking about. But I'm not for this fucking Seinfeld yet. No. So I never got into Zizek. This fucking accent and just like this is funny. I'm British born but live in Ecuador for half my life now. I wish my Spanish sounded as good as your English does. Mira, me hacen burla. I'm telling you that right now. I get made fun of for my Spanish. There was a time where my Spanish was better when I was digging into like learning about fucking Chicano history and fucking indigenous cultures. Yeah, me también. Yeah, bro, but I don't got the excuse of like being British born. But I'm sorry that you're born over there. It's not your fault. Um, but that being said, like I'll try to sprinkle in the Spanglish here and there. Like I said, se me traba la lengua. Sometimes I can only express myself in Spanish. All right, we're having way too much fucking fun to have this article up right here, but I appreciate it. Gracias. So why is this Biden's aid to Gaza, quote unquote aid, plan is a fig leaf for genocide? And please, I encourage everybody, the electronic Antifada, especially their YouTube channel. Like, I haven't covered their YouTube channel on here. I'm a fucking crybaby, y'all. Soy un pinche chillón. Like, I cry over this stuff. Out of anger, out of sense of helplessness, the hopelessness, all that. And when I watch the videos that that they have on their channel, which please go subscribe to their channel. They're doing real work. Like I'm always getting choked up. I'm always yeah. But I need to grow a pair and fucking I'll break down and pull out clips because they have long streams. Um and there's a lot of powerful moments on their videos. The issue is that it's so interconnected that it's hard to just focus on one thing because it all bleeds into, no pun intended, bleeds into another. All right. Biden's Gaza, quote unquote, aid plan, a fig leaf for genocide. This is Maureen Claire Murphy and Ali Abunimah. My apologies if I'm butchering that. This is heartbreaking. Children. Children. This is what US aid is going towards Zionism. The Biden administration on Wednesday vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for humanitarian pauses to deliver urgently need aid to Gaza. But it put forward its own bogus quote unquote aid plan that amounts to nothing more than quote unquote humanitarian window dressing for Israel's genocidal US backed bombing campaign. The resolution introduced by Brazil, quote, called for humanitarian access to Gaza and protection of civilians, unquote, and condemned the Hamas attack on Israel on September 7th, the New York Times reported. So they're playing the game, right? They're playing the game of bowing down to the US and their puppet, Israel. Let's not start with this anti Semitic bullshit that somehow Israel is puppeteering the United States. No, no, there's one big dog, and that's the United States. The United States has supported and backed countless brutal, fascist, genocidal regimes. This is not unique. Do not fall for anti Semitism because Zionists weaponize that shit as well. Let's see if we could watch this here.
Those against?
Yeah, I knew it was good.
Abstentions?
Ow.
The result of the voting is as follows: 12 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 2 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the council.
This whole permanent bullshit. The UN is a fucking facade. It's a joke. It's meant to give the illusion that somehow there's some fucking justice in the world. The USA just vetoed a ceasefire resolution to deliver humanitarian resources to Gaza at the UN. That's what we just heard. The article continues. Maj Bamia, a diplomat representing the Palestinian Authority at the UN, said that Brazil's, quote, draft resolution was biased, politicized, failed to acknowledge Palestinian victims, and the Israeli indiscriminate attacks against them, failed to call for a ceasefire, all to avoid a U.S. veto. It was vetoed, nevertheless. This is from somebody representing the Palestinian Authority who a lot of Palestinians see as sellouts, as cozying up to Zionism. And even here, their diplomat calls out Brazil for this half-ass, virtue signaling, all to concede and grovel to the United States, and still the United States says, go fuck yourself. We won't even do the minimum to save Palestinians, to stop a genocide. Fuck off. That's what the U.S. says. The U.S. cast its veto, according to the Times, quote, because the U.S. wanted to give diplomacy a chance as President Biden was in Israel, because it did not state that Israel has a right to defend itself. Do you see why Bernie Sanders' speech from the beginning was bullshit? Because the moment you say, and this is what the U.S. wants you to say, that Israel has the right to defend itself, you're promoting, you're advocating for Israel's colonization of Palestine, which leads directly to the genocide, to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And this is a desperation of not the politicians and the surrounding Arab countries, but of the people, the Arab people. Truck drivers desperately waiting to bring in aid, right? 200 trucks were allowed to take supplies into Gaza, but 5,000 a day is the estimate need. These politicians have the ability to stop this. And you see the desperation that people on the ground have, where they know they cannot give enough, but they have to fucking try. And these aren't people living in luxury. We know that the surrounding countries themselves are struggling. Political sellouts or not, that the people themselves are struggling. Denying food and medicine is not even a defensive measure. No, it's not. It's a genocidal measure. Because Israel can never defend itself. Israel is colonizing Palestine. Every act it takes is meant to legitimize the colonization process. It's meant to rid themselves of the indigenous Palestinian. And we see how this again, I'll read the quote. The U.S. cast its veto, according to the Times, quote, because the U.S. wanted to give diplomacy a chance as President Biden was in Israel, and because it did not state that Israel has a right to defend itself. So we already acknowledged the second half of this, but the whole diplomacy, the bullshit excuse of diplomacy, right? So we see how these politicians use the idea of politics itself to prevent a genocide from continuing. The ego, well, you could, if you want to personalize it, you said, oh, the ego of Joe Biden, he wants to be the one to come up with the resolution. But no, that's just the excuse. That's just the excuse. What they want is to give Israel enough time to cause enough damage to where this chapter of colonization can be closed. Right? Or to perceive to be closed. The same way that the United States colonization project, its manifest destiny, is perceived to be over with. This is why people refute land back. This is why people dismiss indigenous activists. And we'll see later on with the majority report how the colonial mind of saying we won, we're here, we established ourselves, fucking get over it or die, is genocidal, supports genocide. Y'all are fucking destroying the planet. And still that's not enough for y'all to back down, to step aside, for fucking justice to occur. But this is the intent, right? This is the goal. The U.S. to fund Israel, to provide enough arms to where they can destroy enough of Gaza, where they kill enough people, where they can ethnically cleanse enough Palestinians from that land, that this can be forgotten. Just as Israel's origins are forgotten as a colonial project, the existence of Palestinians in Palestine can be excised from the fucking history books. Or only remain in the history books. Oh yeah, that happened a long time ago. The same way 75 years is a long time ago now. All right, let's continue. The tweet here from Tim Sharrock. Biden's UN ambassador underscores the bankruptcy of US quote unquote diplomacy. This is Fernandes Fasihi. The United States vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution put forth by Brazil that called for humanitarian access to Gaza and protection for civilians, that condemned the Hamas attack on Israel. The resolution had 12 votes in favor, 2 abstentions, and 1 negative. Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, said that the reason she vetoed the resolution on providing humanitarian aid to Gaza was because the U.S. wanted to give diplomacy a chance as President Biden was in Israel, and because it did not state that Israel has a right to defend itself. Okay, it's just, I'm sorry, y'all, but sometimes I get frustrated when articles include like Twitter links because it's just repetitive, and then you end up reading both, right? But it's, that's the source, so it's essential to be there. The article continues. Gaza, a besieged coastal enclave, has been under total Israeli blockade and constant bombardment for nearly 2 weeks, with a death toll reaching 3,500, including at least 1,200 children, on Wednesday, according to its health ministry. Zionists need to make up Zionists need to make up stories of Israeli babies being beheaded. Joe Biden, the fucking president of the United States, will repeat these lies, this propaganda meant to dehumanize Palestinians, meant to justify genocide against Palestinians. Meanwhile, 1,200, 1,200 Palestinian children have been killed by Israelis. When you're the victim, you don't need to make shit up. But when you're the colonizer, when you're the abuser, the occupier, you need to make shit up to vilify the indigenous people. This is why we do not denounce. It's a propaganda war. Colonizers, Zionists lie to feed the war machine, to justify genocide. Condemning resistance, condemning liberation forces is playing into their hands. By any means necessary, because that's how they operate. That's how colonizers operate. They will ethnically cleanse the land of Palestinians by any and all means that present themselves. The so-called left and the right of in Israel. The left is Zionists versus the right Zionists. Their contentions, their arguments is how to go about ethnically cleansing the land of Palestinians. That's what they argue about. That's fundamentally their concern is how do we go about it? Not should we, not can we, but how to. What is most convenient? What can we get away with? Actually giving quote unquote diplomacy a chance would mean supporting an end to the carnage so that a political solution could be found. Instead of undertaking any sort of diplomacy to end the daily massacre of hundreds of Palestinians, the Biden White House has denounced calls for a ceasefire as quote unquote repugnant. It is giving unconditional backing to Israel's vows to annihilate Hamas, a political movement that enjoys broad support among Palestinians and across the region. Let's read that again for all these fucking liberal Zionists, all these liberals that wake up denouncing Hamas and go to sleep denouncing Hamas, who have never been oppressed, who have never gone through a fucking hard day in their life. Hamas, a political movement that enjoys broad support among Palestinians and across the region. If the colonized people of Palestine are in support of Hamas, and those across the region who are at the mercy of Israel and US military power, who the fuck are we in our comfort in the belly of the beast to denounce any form of liberation, any form whatsoever, while we sit fucking comfortably? Get the fuck out of here. We do not denounce. We do not denounce. Can we be critical? Fuck yes. But this is a propaganda war. This is our end of it, right? So never fucking denounce. And it doesn't even fucking work either. It does nothing. It's ineffective. All it does is concede ground to Zionists to these fucking colonizers, you're just giving them fucking fuel. All resistance is justified. It's not fucking complicated. Let's continue. Biden rejected by regional allies. The U.S. position is now so extreme and reprehensible, particularly following Tuesday's bloodbath at Gaza's Al Ali hospital, that King Abdul of Jordan, a reliable American ally, cancels Biden's planned stop in Amman. Abdallah and Biden were to be joined by Egyptian leader Abdullah Fattah al-Sisi. I apologize. Reading this shit is so much more difficult than like hearing it and repeating it. For a summit in the Jordanian capital, Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas had already pulled out. Biden was reduced to going on a cheerleading visit to Israel, shorn of the pretense that he was engaging in any sort of regional diplomacy. But in an attempt to spin the trip as something more than that, Biden announced that he got Israel and Egypt to agree to the transfer of humanitarian aid to Gaza via Egypt. Even if aid does start trickling in from Egypt, this would not be much more than a public relations exercise. It would not significantly alleviate the enormous harm and suffering that Israel is deliberately inflicting on the civilian population as collective punishment. Remember, collective punishment is a fucking war crime. The 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza are without water, food, fuel, and medicine, life essentials, because Israel has deliberately cut them off. This is a crime against humanity of the highest order against people the Israeli government has labeled, quote unquote, human animals. But it's not a genocide, they say. It's not a genocide, and Israel has a right to defend themselves. And yet, this is genocidal language. As the occupying power, Human Rights Watch observes, Israel, quote, has a duty under the Fourth Geneva Convention to the fullest extent of the means available to it of ensuring the food and medical supplies of the population, unquote. Do you see how like sickening this is? That even Human Rights Watch, when like trying to like defend and advocate for Palestinians, they're not doing so by saying, hey, like we support the total liberation of Palestine. The way they do it is by saying, Israel, you are the fucking occupiers here. And that means that you have certain responsibilities to the people you're occupying. How sick and twisted is that? How demented is it that it's not cause for liberation? It's not cause for justice. It's literally Human Rights Watch saying, treat the people you're occupying like you would have. It's so fucking dehumanizing to say, hey, you have to take care of them and feed them. Like you have that responsibility at the very least. You don't have to see them as human. You don't have to give them rights. You could take their land. You could kill them off. But you have to at least provide them medicine and food. Quote, starvation as a method of warfare is prohibited and is a war crime, unquote. This is the shit that needs to be said out loud. This is how low it is. This is how disgusting and repugnant Israel is. That this needs to be said. Starvation as a method of warfare is prohibited and is a war crime. No fucking shit. They know what they're doing. It's intentional. It's a genocide. They're not concerned about fucking war crimes. Nobody's going to hold them accountable. and they have the US supporting them. Biden aims to help Israeli war propaganda. The agreement made by the US and Israel, supposedly to ensure the delivery of aid to Gaza, is being taunted by the Biden administration as evidence that the president hasn't completely forsaken Palestinians. Even as federal employees begin to quit in protest over Biden's hardline pro Israel approach, and a White House representative was heckled during a visit to a Chicago suburb where a Palestinian American child was killed in a brutal hate crime. The fact that a fucking child, a Palestinian child, outside of Zionist occupation, Gaza or the West Bank, that Palestinian children are being targeted and murdered by Zionists internationally. That's how sick, insidious, barbaric this is. It's genocide. This is what happens. This is what happens when genocide is occurring. There is no safety for Palestinians. They're being targeted from academia, their careers, their jobs, their livelihoods, to their own fucking lives. And not even within the occupation, the subjugation, the murder campaign of Israel. And that's why this has to be an international struggle. And that's why there must be international solidarity with Palestinians. Because the hate, the genocide, Zionism is international. So must anti-Zionism. Here, loud boos for White House rep Delaware site speaking at the vigil to how fucking soulless do you have to be to show up to a vigil of this Palestinian child who was murdered because of the fucking Zionist propaganda that you pushed? Joe Biden, the president of the United States, lied, spread Zionist propaganda that Palestinian liberation forces were beheading babies.
President Biden has been very, very clear. There is no place for hate in America. What about the fake news? Not against Muslims. I'm speaking to you as a Muslim American. Not against Arab Americans.
They should have swarmed that motherfucker. That was for the vigil for Weda Fayumi. Killed by his fucking landlord. Somebody who this child's mother said, like, basically you viewed him like a grandfather figure. Trusted him around her child. And the Zionist propaganda is so insidious, so dangerous, so genocidal that it encouraged, it enabled this man to murder a child for Israel's existence. Yusuf Abu Shaban an 18-year-old U.S. citizen struck in Gaza, injured in a rocket attack. His sister was killed. His family tried to leave and sought help from State Department and embassy. No one helped. The U.S. government is failing in its obligation to protect all U.S. citizens. And here's the thing. It's discussing that in order to garner sympathy or attention, you have to emphasize this was a U.S. citizen. Because it shouldn't fucking matter. But the reality is that it does. And that's how devoted to this project of genocide the United States is. To have a outpost in the quote unquote Middle East. To have a nuclear power to be ready to combat Iran and the neighboring Arab states if they ever decide to resist U.S. hegemony. And this is a price the United States, Joe Biden, is willing to pay to ensure this. An 18-year-old kid, his sister gone. So yes, whether it's here in the States or in Gaza, the U.S. will sacrifice U.S. citizens to uphold Zionism for its convenience. This is President Biden. I just announced $100 million for humanitarian assistance in Gaza and the West Bank. This money will support over 1 million displaced and conflict-affected Palestinians, and we will have mechanism in place so this aid reaches those in need, not Hamas or terrorist groups. 100 million. How many fucking billions did they give Israel to conduct this genocide? But this motherfucker wants a pat in the back for 100 million? To what? To encourage to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine? Right? Because this is essentially what the project is. In Israel's mind is we will murder the Palestinians that remain in Gaza, or they will quote unquote willingly expel themselves, right? They've done this from the Nakba to today. That's what I'm saying. It's a continuous colonial settler project. It has not stopped. It has not ended. $2 billion every year to Israel. $100 billion package for Israel, Ukraine, in the works right now. $100 billion. It's when Che Guevara says like we live in the belly of the beast. I'm able to stream. I won't tell you how I was able to afford this because I came up. But I'm able here to stream, to rub my mouth, to talk my shit, to try and encourage others to educate themselves on these topics. But I'm in comfort, right? Even though all these other white streamers would lose their shit if they live in the circumstances that real fucking blue collar workers do. It's still a comfort to be living in the belly of the beast that is funding genocide. So yeah, we hold responsibility We have a responsibility to combat this. And it's so frustrating that the propaganda aspect is the easiest. I'm not saying I'm doing anything revolutionary here, far from it. But this aspect is the easiest, the most comfortable, the safest. And liberals, Zionist liberals, are propagating liberal Zionist propaganda themselves. The same ones that will be encouraging you to vote for Joe Biden, who's funding a genocide. But as noted, the agreement is just a fig leaf for Israel's horrific extermination campaign in Gaza. Quote, Israel's war cabinet on Wednesday approved the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza from Egypt following pressure from the US and other countries. Unquote. Axios reported on Wednesday. A senior Israeli official told the publication that, quote, during this meeting with the Israeli war cabinet, Biden asked that Israel allow the entry of humanitarian aid to Gaza and explained it would help in maintaining international support for the operation against Hamas. Fucking shit. You see the game that they're playing? It's just propaganda. It's just literally, hey, throw them some scraps so people don't get too riled up about the fact that we're funding a genocide. Yep. So the whole point of this is Mark Ames. So the whole point of allowing in some humanitarian aid is a PR move to make it easier for Israel to continue the Gaza slaughter. Yep. Exactly it, right? It's again, I'm not saying anything profound. It's simple and direct. Biden assured Israel that the transfer of humanitarian aid to Gaza would be halted if it was diverted by Hamas and pledged a $100 million US aid package for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. That is a paltry amount compared to the minimum of $3.8 billion in military aid the US provides annually to Israel and is nowhere near the amount necessary to rebuild infrastructure and housing in Gaza destroyed by Israel with US provided weapons. And that is assuming that any of it will even reach Gaza. It won't. Impossible task. More urgently, it would do nothing to address Gaza's spiraling humanitarian crisis. Providing food, water, fuel, and medicine to Gaza's population through Egypt would require a logistical operation on a historical vast scale, similar to the Berlin airlift. In 1948, the Soviet Union imposed a total blockade on West Berlin following the political dispute with the United States and its Western allies. For 10 months, the US and its allies mounted an enormous aerial resupply operation to 2.5 million people in Hitler's war ravaged former capital. At the airlift's peak, keeping the population in West Berlin. I kind of don't want to read this shit because I don't like the comparison. But nonetheless, at the airlift's peak, keeping the population in West Berlin supplied with food, fuel, and medicine required one aircraft fuel of cargo to land every 45 seconds. By contrast, Biden announced that Egyptian leader Abdullah Fattah al-Sisi had agreed to, quote, let up to 20 trucks through to begin with, end quote, carrying supplies into Gaza in the coming days. That's about one truckload of supplies for every 100,000 of Gaza's already exhausted, dehydrated, and increasingly hungry population. Now, real quick, the reason why I don't like that comparison, why I understand why, you know, they're trying to illustrate really what is needed. Why I don't like that comparison is because I do not hold, you know, the Germans, those in West Berlin, to be comparable to Palestinians. You're talking about former fucking Nazis. Well, we're talking about colonized people in Gaza. But again, the point stands. It was, I'm going to dismiss and say it was just to illustrate what it really is required to provide real aid. There is absolutely no plan on the table for a supply operation from Egypt on the enormous scale required to meet even the most basic needs of Gaza's population. And nor is that even necessary. While the United States could not order the Soviet Union about in 1948, the Biden administration can simply instruct Israel, which is entirely dependent on US military and political support, to turn the supply of water, food, fuel, medicine, and electricity for Gaza's 2.3 million civilians back on. Instead, Biden has acquiesced to Israel's decision that a photogenic trickle of aid will be allowed into Gaza through Egypt, but that Israel will not resume the supply of any life essentials into Gaza until the captives being held in its territory are freed. That is nothing less than a death sentence for millions of people. All right. No safe place. While Biden's Egypt quote unquote aid announcement is merely a fig leaf for a genocidal siege and extermination campaign directly aided by the United States, the president is moving quickly to get huge amounts of new weapons into Tel Aviv's hands. Biden is requesting, quote, an unprecedented military aid package for Israel, end quote, from Congress, Axios reported, adding that, quote, Israel's officials say they asked for $10 billion in aid and that it would and that it was approved as soon as possible, end quote. If when any aid does get into Gaza via Egypt, however, inadequate it may be, distribution would require an end to Israel's constant bombing across the territory, something again that the US opposes. Martin Griffith, the UN's relief chief, told the UN Security Council on Wednesday that the UN and its humanitarian partners, particularly the Red Crescent, quote, must be able to deliver the relief to civilians in need throughout Gaza, quote, in safety. At present, no area is safe in Gaza, with constant Israeli airstrikes, even in southern Gaza, the area to which Israel last week ordered 1.1 million Palestinians in the north to evacuate. Israel's evacuation order was, quote, intended to forcibly displace hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and move them closer to the border with Egypt. Three Palestinian human rights groups, Al-Haq, Al-Mazan, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, said on Wednesday, quote, this forcible transfer is taking place amid the looming humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, end quote. They added, the Forensic Architecture Unit of Al-Haq, one of Palestinians' human rights groups, confirmed that 70 Palestinians were killed in an airstrike that hit convoys driving south to Salah al-Din Road, one of two routes that the Israeli military had instructed to be used for evacuation. So were the Israeli military telling Palestinians to evacuate through and to, they're still bombing that area. But they want you to think it's not genocide. They want you to think that they're not indiscriminately killing civilians. They want you to think that everyone that they're killing was either a terrorist or a terrorist supporter. Since the evacuation order, the Israeli military has targeted homes full of people who moved from the northern half of Gaza following Israel's order. One of those strikes killed 12 family members of Hassan Halassa, who works for the Independent Commission for Human Rights. Fucking A. They're just killing doctors, Human Rights Watch activists, press. Anybody helping Palestinians? Anybody try to prevent a genocide or expose a genocide is on Israel's hit list. The head of the Norwegian Refugee Council, meanwhile, said that the family members of one of its staff were killed in Rafah, where they had sought safety following Israel's evacuation orders. The bombing in Khan, Yunis, and Rafah in southern Gaza intensified beginning early Tuesday, killing 80 people and injuring dozens more, according to Palestinian human rights group, citing the local authorities. An Israeli airstrike, meanwhile, damaged the entrance to the European hospital in Khan Yunis shortly before the bombing of Al Ahi hospital in Gaza City that killed hundreds. Quote, hundreds of additional fatalities are believed to be trapped under the rubble. End quote, according to the UN, which also estimated that aside from casualties from war violence, mortality rates in Gaza, quote, have been on the rise due to the extremely limited access to essential health care services. End quote. So yeah, nobody's safe. Nobody's safe anywhere. Even if you follow Israelis' orders, they will still shoot you down. They will still bomb you. They will still massacre you. Looming mass ethnic cleansing. As Israel continues to mercilessly attack the civilian population, causing dozens of deaths and hundreds of serious injuries every day, the territory's health system is at a breaking point. In the north half of Gaza, around 70% of the remaining population have been deprived of health services. After the UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, evacuated to the south and stopped the services in the north. Our organization have received reports, including from our colleagues in Gaza, of multiple families, even up to 50 people, crammed into one house without water, food, or electricity, end quote, the Palestinian rights group said. Some families that left their homes for the south have turned to the northern half of Gaza because nowhere is safe and they don't want to be uprooted from their land, as is Israel's apparent objective. Other people had remained in the north since they were unable or unwilling to relocate. The evacuation, quote, does not absolve Israel from its obligations and responsibilities under international humanitarian law, end quote, the rights group stated. They observed that every 3 in 4 Palestinians in Gaza, quote, are already refugees to whom Israel has denied the right of return since 1948, end quote. The fucking 1900s. The looming mass ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza requires immediate intervention by the international community to halt this forcible transfer, which may amount to a war crime and a crime against humanity, quote, the group said. May. We're way past fucking May. Okay. That's fucking ridiculous. May. This fucking like pussyfooting around, this half-assing calling it out for what it is, a fucking genocide, is repulsive. All right. Now into the propaganda aspect of things. The Majority Report has 1 million subscribers, an audience that claims to be on the left, constantly, attacking and criticizing the right. They hold their tongue when other liberals, expose themselves. They don't have the same energy, right? When the Young Turks were out here being transphobic, when they were out here hating on homeless people, Sam Seder Emma Vigeland, Matt Leck, Matt Bender. None of them had the energy, the same energy to combat it, to call that out. It wasn't convenient. They didn't want to split their audience that way, right? Because this is all a financial endeavor for these fuckers. So let's hear it. We've seen here throughout these videos, again, Sam Seder advocated bombing Libya, supports funding the State Department, can't expect much from those. Yeah, you can't. You can't, but you still have to call it out. The same way that they still call out fucking Steven Crowder and all those other fucking people. Those ghouls, right? We have to call out liberals. You know, Matt Leck acts like his boss, Sam Seder's his best friend. And he's essentially his attack dog. Anybody criticizes Sam Seder from the left, Matt Leck is there to fucking to defend his boss, his bestie. I had to stop listening to Left Reckoning, even though I like what's the name? David Gruesome. I'm not trying to butcher his name. I just have a trouble remembering or pronouncing it correctly. I like what David brings to the table. I like the way that he speaks. Very calming. He's very insightful. But I cannot stand the hypocrisy of Matt Leck. And let's hear him speak up and correct Sam Seder's lies about Zionism. Let's hear it. Right? Because it's his boss, but any leftist has to combat Zionist propaganda. You would think, right?
Zionism was not one thing when it started. It was not. There were people who thought they were going to create a socialist utopia in Israel, and one that would recognize the shared humanity of the people who were living there.
Wow.
And as often in these type of situations, other people in that coalition had other designs, and you got onto a trajectory that led us here. I mean, I was having conversations with people about this, 25 years ago, and they're like, the dream has died.
25 years ago, y'all.
But there was a dream. And now, like, not only did the dream die, but it takes a while for it to become real. That, like, look, it's not working. It's just not working. You cannot deny the humanity of people this long, this many, if you are that size of a country. I mean, I suppose you could do it if you were, if there was 70 million people there, you could suppress these people for a lot longer. I guess theoretically, although, one would like to think that there would be more dissent there, but
Right.
it's just not working. So, I mean, and that's why, like, I feel like I don't have to engage in the who is more morally righteous in this situation argument. I don't find that, like, to be helpful. I have beliefs about it, and that my first order ideas, I think, are always, at least in my mind, I'm trying to do something that's more moral than others. I mean, but I think even the worst perpetrators of horrible things think that they're the ones who are morally righteous.
Right.
So just really quickly on that, what he's referring to there is the Palestinian liberation attack on Israel on the 7th. That's why he's saying, that everybody thinks they're morally correct. Because he considers them terrorists. But there's a whole other bullshit. Oh, the bullshit that this guy's Liberal Zionists, right here. This is what they are.
But what is quite clear is that if Israel exists as a safe haven for Jews, it has failed in that mission. It's
All right. Let's let him finish here. The second half of this.
trajectory that I was having conversation with people for this long, this many, although, you know, one would like to think that I feel like I don't have to engage in my mind, you know, I'm trying to do something that's more moral than others. I mean, but I think even the worst perpetrators of horrible things think that they're the ones who are morally righteous.
Right.
But what is quite clear is that if Israel exists as a safe haven for Jews, it has failed in that mission. It's 75 years now. And if the entire country is terrified to the point where they want to go in and slaughter thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, displace millions of people, that seems to me to be a fairly obvious failure of that project, at least the way it's been pursued.
The apartheid system, the immiseration of Palestinians, is a security threat to Israel. Like,
I cannot stand fucking private school corporate lawyer parents Emma Vigeland, mainly because she's so talentless. Like, this is failing upwards, and this is where she landed. My conspiracy theory is that Sam Seder only hired her because he could not risk hiring somebody that would outshine him again, like Brooks did. Conveniently, that's exactly who I'm going to use to demonstrate how what Sam Seder just did is spread Zionist propaganda.
Zionism was not one thing.
The top.
When
the main point of contention is this: the historical lies that he's spreading here about Zionism's origins. He says Zionism is not just one thing.
Zionism was not one thing when it started. It was not. There were people who thought they were going to create a socialist utopia in Israel, and one that would recognize the shared humanity of the people who were living there.
One that was shit. Are you fucking serious? One that would recognize the shared humanity of the people that were living there? This is what he's saying one of the branches of Zionism was. This is what he's telling to his 1 million subscriber. At the moment, 5,000 people watching.
And as often in these type of situations, other people in that coalition had other designs, and you got onto a trajectory that led us here. I mean,
so they got onto a trajectory that led us here. They got onto it, meaning that originally that was not the trajectory that Zionism was headed towards. And don't be mistaken either. The other aspect of this is dismissing, denouncing socialism, right? Because these are liberals here. So essentially, he's doing two things: spreading Zionist propaganda about Zionism's true origins and intention, and two, backhandingly dismissing socialism because it got co-opted and it couldn't withstand the new direction, the fascist direction, right? But that's not the main or the important issue, but it must be recognized. This is what liberals do. They never miss an opportunity to delegitimize socialism. But his main contention is that Zionists originally wanted to create a socialist utopia, and that they wanted to create an environment where the shared humanity of people there were recognized. Exactly. So he's trying to make it seem like, whoops, they got overtaken by more fascist elements, but initially, its direction was not supposed to be this. We weren't supposed to be here. Mind you, liberal Zionists all have similar talking points because Marianne Williamson also spread this bullshit on the Zionist Guard, where they remain quiet, the same way that Emma Vigeland and Matt Leck remain quiet while Sam spread the Zionist propaganda. One more time, just so that when we pull out Michael Brooks, you see I'm not bullshitting or reaching here.
Zionism was not one thing when it started. It was not. There were people who thought they were going to create a socialist utopia in Israel, and one that would recognize the shared humanity of the people who were living there. And as often in these type of situations, other people in that coalition had other designs, and
other people in that coalition had other designs. 2 decades in media, 2 decades on the mic, over 2 decades on the mic. And this motherfucker sounds like Porky the Pig half the time. I'm telling you, his father was also a fucking corporate lawyer, is a corporate lawyer. These motherfuckers fail upward.
Other people in that.
Let's hear this. Yo, this is from 2019. 2019. No excuse. No excuse for Sam Seder to be spreading this propaganda. Here we go.
Can you, though, trace for us, because I think it's actually, I like that, though, because, okay, on one hand, there's this rosy-eyed history, and some people even hold this other narrative that Israel was this great, incredible thing, and then it was corrupted by Likud and Netanyahu, and of course that isn't true. No. But then conversely, the other narrative that Israel was always just, all it ever is was just a settler right-wing thing. It was a settler thing, but there was complexities to, a labor socialist government, then the rise of the sort of neoliberals, then you even have Ehud Barak in a third way, and then a forerunner of this sort of resurgent far right that we see across the Western Hemisphere, starting when Netanyahu came back to power in 2008. So can you talk to us just about those kind of big periods of broader Israeli political history?
Broader Israeli political history. This is why liberal Zionists need to educate themselves. And I hope, and it seems like, if I recall correctly, Michael Brooks abandoned this aspect here. He's questioning it. He wants to be educated on it, whereas Sam Seder is outright spreading historical Zionist propaganda. So let's hear the response to this.
History that you have seen?
Well, yes and no. Because, in fact, if you look at the last 125 years of Zionism, it was a settler colonial movement.
That's objectively true.
You can't get away from that.
Right.
And they were more liberal settler colonialists, and they were more conservative, more religious, and more secular. But that was, in other words, the Zionist movement, that was a left socialist nationalist movement in the turn of the 20th century, came to the country with the intention of taking it over, of Judaizing the country. In other words, transforming an Arab country into a Jewish country, transforming Palestine into the land of Israel. And that was the agenda. So in a sense, whether you were on the right or on the left, you had that same political logic. It was the left, you might say, the Labour Party that founded the state of Israel. It was them that did the ethnic cleansing of 1948, that destroyed all the Palestinian villages, drove half the Palestinians out. It was a Labour.
Y'all hear that? 2019. 2019. So what excuse does Sam Seder have to be lying about the original intent of Zionism? What excuse is there to be spreading Zionist propaganda about the origins of Israel? He wasn't listening. No. Here's something that we do with particularly white men, but we infantilize them. Well, how can you know? Oh, you got to lower your expectations. You got to lower the bar. No. This was his best friend, Michael Brooks, that passed away. If you were a fan of Michael Brooks, every now and then, let's be honest, every now and then, you'll go through the catalog and rewatch his videos, man. I do it. I can admit it. I know I joke around a lot. I'm saying like and subscribe, and I will get a candle with Michael Brooks, ascending. So anytime any of these fucking white leftists bring him up or use him, we can pull out the candle and light that shit up. But here's the thing. This was in 2019. 2019. And Michael Brooks was already getting checked and corrected on this notion that somehow Zionism, Israel, wasn't just wholeheartedly, completely, unquestionably, fuck the nuance, a colonial project that was meant to colonize Palestine. So we have here Sam Seder lying. I know Matt Leck. I'm assuming it was Matt Leck that was conducting, the production of Michael Brooks' show, specifically this one. So why didn't he speak up? Because Sam Seder's the big boss. If he wants to spread Zionist propaganda, Matt Leck will sit there quietly and nod along. But here we have on Michael Brooks' show combating that bullshit lie. And we'll play it from the top. Look at this.
Zionism was not one thing when
It wasn't.
it started.
According to Sam Seder, it wasn't one thing.
It was not. There were people who thought they were going to create a socialist utopia.
A socialist utopia. That what?
And one that would recognize the shared humanity of the people who were living there.
One that would recognize the shared humanity of the people that were living there, the Palestinians, the indigenous population. A socialist utopia that would recognize the shared humanity of Palestinians.
Can you, though, trace for us, because I think it's actually, I like that, though, because, okay, on one hand, there's this rosy-eyed history, and some people even hold this other narrative that Israel was this great, incredible thing, and then it was corrupted by Likud and Netanyahu, and of course that isn't true. No. But then conversely,
Of course that isn't true. What Sam Seder is spreading, Michael Brooks says, of course that isn't true.
Other narrative that Israel was always just, all it ever is was just the settler right-wing thing. It was a settler thing, but there was complexities to, a labor socialist government, then the rise of the sort of neoliberals, then you even have Ehud Barak in a third way, and then a forerunner of this sort of resurgent far right that we see across the Western Hemisphere, starting when Netanyahu came back to power in 2008. So,
and now even Michael Brooks here, denouncing what Sam Seder is spreading, the bullshit, the Zionist historical lies, but flirting with the idea that it's a more complicated issue, right? Something that liberals love to do. And Michael Brooks was escaping that liberal mindset. So what is the answer to this attempt to obfuscate, to make it more complicated, to humanize the Zionist project?
So can you talk to us just about those kind of big periods of broader Israeli political history that you have seen?
Well, yes and no. Because, in fact, I mean, if you look at the last 125 years of Zionism, it was a settler colonial movement.
That's objectively true.
You can't,
yes, that's
you can't get away from that.
Right.
And they were more liberal settler colonialists, and they were more conservative, more religious, and more secular. But that was, in other words, the Zionist movement, that was a left socialist nationalist movement in the turn of the 20th century, came to the country with the intention of taking it over.
So you see there, while it was a leftist nationalist movement, right? Or as Sam Seder would say, trying to create a socialist utopia, where the lie is, where the Zionist propaganda lies in, is the idea about this, not just a socialist utopia, but one that would recognize the shared humanities of the indigenous people, of the Palestinians. That's what Sam Seder is pushing. That's the Zionist propaganda he's pushing. The historical revisionism, right?
Of Judaizing the country. In other words, transforming an Arab country into a Jewish country. Of Judaizing the country.
Look at
In other
that.
words, religious and more secular. But that was, in other words, the Zionist movement that was a left socialist nationalist movement in the turn of the 20th century came to the country with the intention of taking it over.
With the intention of taking it over. Not of sharing and seeing somebody's humanity, with the intention of taking over.
Came to the country with the intention of taking it over. Of Judaizing the country. In other words, transforming an Arab country into a Jewish country. Transforming Palestine into the land of Israel. And that was the agenda. So in a sense, whether you were on the right or on the left, you had that same political logic.
Whether you're on the right or the left, it was the same fucking logic. It wasn't that somebody came on the right and co-opted the Zionist ideology and project, as Sam Seder insinuated, as he claimed happened. No. The argument was never about whether or not to colonize from the leftist Zionists or the right Zionists. It was how to colonize.
It was the left, you might say, the Labor Party that founded the state of Israel. It was them that did the ethnic cleansing of 1948, that destroyed all the Palestinian villages, drove half the Palestinians out. It was a Labor.
Sam Seder is unquestionably a liberal Zionist. Sam Seder, without a doubt, is spreading Zionist propaganda on the Majority Report. Matt Leck, his leftist attack dog, stayed quiet, stayed silent. Emma Vigeland, no trust fund baby, Emma Vigeland, no pushback to that. A Zionist historical lies. But the Majority Report is the pillar of white leftist streamers. They all turn to Sam Seder. Fucking disgusting. Now, I could have pulled out sources from Theodore Herzl himself, sources from like that we pull off here in other streams. We'll read the fucking quotes of what these Zionist leaders were saying, their intentions, their duplicity. But there's something fucking sweet about pulling up a Michael Brooks clip to expose Sam Seder. Now, I don't want to like misquote Brooks, and that's why I pulled it up. Because I think he would have appreciated when motherfuckers speculate what the fuck Pac would say. You don't know shit about a dead man's perspective, and talking shit will get your neck bone disconnected. Disrespected. That motherfucker always loved to fucking quote lyrics. And here we are, from the fucking grave, Michael Brooks exposing Sam Seder for the Zionist fucking propagandist that he is. A liberal Zionist to the fucking core. You doubt me? You fucking doubt me. All right. One last time. Let's see what Sam Seder has to say. God damn, hearing this motherfucker's unbearable. One last time. I'm acting like I don't have to be up in a few hours for a 16-hour shift, but here we fucking are, working harder than Emma Vigeland and Sam Seder have ever done in their whole fucking lives. Look at this.
Was all you heard about was that Israel had been attacked by 6 different countries, and it was a big David and Goliath story, and things started to both change in the way that Israel approached that region, and also simultaneously a growing understanding of like how the country was founded. And the further you get away from that, the further you get away, and there's more history about how that country was founded. And I don't believe that you can go backwards in that way any more than we can say like the United States should essentially not exist anymore.
We can't.
And we can't.
Israel exists and it will exist.
But the way in which that
Jesus
country
Christ.
deals with a greater understanding of that past and deals with the path forward, it's untenable. I mean, at the final analysis, it is untenable. And the question isn't, will there ever be a single country or a resolution to this? There will be at one point. It's just a question of how many people have to die and be immiserated between now and then. And it could be decades from now or not, but it's not. This is untenable. And by die, I'm not even just talking about within the context of the Palestinian population or the Israeli population. I mean, this has the potential to expand, and I sort of feel like we're at a much more tenuous.
All right. I never want to be accused of taking somebody out of context, so I do provide longer clips. The motherfucker rambles and stumbles through his words left and right. Things that you would think a communicator, somebody whose career is to verbalize their ideas, would, after over 2 decades on the mic, would be over. I get nervous when I do this. I'm still on here. How often do you hear me stutter, mumble, pause to collect my thoughts? As much as this motherfucker? When do you hear fuck out of here? This isn't difficult. But you motherfuckers set the bar so low. Fucking rich white man. The standard, man. Mediocrity is a motherfucker for you guys. But let's hear it from the top, the significant portion of it, and you'll understand why this guy's a fucking. They're liberal Zionists and anti-land back. They're against land back. They said to themselves right here.
All you heard about was that Israel had been attacked by 6 different countries, and it was a big David and Goliath story, and things started to both change in the way that Israel approached that region, and also simultaneously a growing understanding of like how the country was founded, and
a growing understanding of how the country was founded. Mind you, this is the same fucking stream where he lies about the history of Zionism, where he says that they wanted to create a socialist utopia, one that would recognize the shared humanity of the indigenous people living there. That's fucking wild. This is malicious. This is intentional. He knows what he's doing. He supports the existence of Israel. He is a fucking Zionist, a liberal one at that, a liberal Zionist, but a Zionist nonetheless. And what do we hear from this fucking colonizer over here on the left? Emma Vigeland? Look at her. Flashing through her eyes is the idea of indigenous people, of African descendants of slaves, having enough of her people's bullshit. That's why she's against land back. That's why she has to support the existence of Israel.
Further you get away from that, and the further you get away, and there's more history about how that country was founded. And I don't believe that you can go backwards in that way any more than we can say like the United States should essentially not exist anymore.
We can't.
And we can't.
Israel exists and it will exist.
But
They're Zionists, liberal Zionists. They're critical of Israel, but they're Zionists. Look, when you spread Zionist propaganda, and when you say that Israel exists and it will exist, that land cannot be returned to Palestinians, you're advocating for the existence of Israel on Palestinian land. You are a Zionist. Now, you might cry that that's a false accusation, but these are your own words, and we disproved it with Michael Brooks's video. So what the fuck do you have to say? Do you see why this is a propaganda war? Because even the people claiming to be on the left, people claiming to be critical of Israel, are fundamentally supportive of its existence or have conceded it at the very least. That's wild. And the existence of Israel is inherent with the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So fundamentally, they're okay with that. They're just not that comfortable with the way that Israel's currently going about it, with the right-wing colonizers are doing. That's why they hate Benjamin Netanyahu. They're like, why can't you just be chill, man? Why can't you handle it the way that the leftists did? The way that the socialist Zionists did? That's wild to me. Of course, Emma Vigeland cannot support decolonization. Of course she can. Her fucking bloodline is too invested in the colonization of this continent. And Sam Seder can't support that for Israel because he's a fucking Zionist. So next time an indigenous activist, scholar, what have you, comes out to the majority report, I hope they call out these motherfuckers, these fucking colonizing sympathizers. Because here's the thing, if you're against decolonizing Palestine from its Zionist occupiers, from its Zionist colonizers, which is a relatively young country, right? I mean, so is the United States, relatively speaking. But Israel declared its independence in 1948. So if that's too far gone to liberate, and so is the United States, what exactly is the time frame? And I asked these liberal Zionists, Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, what is the appropriate time frame? When is it okay for colonized people to take back their land? When is it acceptable for y'all? When will you allow it? The French were in Algeria for longer than Israel has existed. And that's the thing. These people who claim to be the intelligent, the logical, the clear-headed, the rational leftists refuse to embrace decolonial revolutionary history because they're comfortable with the status quo. Because then they'd be risking their comfort. Kwame Ture spoke about the disgusting creatures that liberals are. How what they're meant to do is to disarm the oppressed, the colonized, how they're meant to be the intermediates between the bourgeois and the proletariat, right? In this case, the colonized and the colonizers, right? Or to propagate the colonizer's mindset to the colonized. That's what they're doing here. They're disarming Palestinian liberation. And they're supporting the existence of Israel. because they're against revolutionary and liberation struggles. To wrap up, Sam Seder not only spread Zionist propaganda about the history of Zionism, not only did we disprove it using Michael Brooks's clip, but he exposed himself against indigenous liberation, against land back, even here in the belly of the beast. This is the pillar of the left, y'all. A fucking liberal Zionist. Michael Brooks is rolling in his ashtray, wherever the fuck they put him in. Like and subscribe, and we'll get a Michael Brooks candle every time we reference him. Anytime any of these fucking liberals try to bring up his memory to support their claims, we'll spark it up for Michael Brooks. Ask a lib, if the Nazis won, when should they have been allowed to keep their exactly Lebensraum? Exactly. I always tell them that. I always say that. So wait, like somebody, a villain that we agree is a villain, should they not be forced to give up the land that they acquired through force, violence, and genocide? Yeah, no. Sam Seder had an MSNBC contract for years. He's hosted as a replacement for was it Chris Hayes? Is that his name? Yeah, he's as mainstream as it gets. He's just the guy's horrible on the mic. That's why he hired Emma Vigeland, a fucking charisma vacuum, so that he wouldn't get overshadowed again. How long did it take Michael Brooks to start demonstrating what a pathetic wet napkin Sam Seder is? No comedic chops, no original ideas, no political ideology. It didn't take long for Michael Brooks to overshadow him. Michael Brooks was in fucking Brazil interviewing Lula, fucking spit shining Lula's shoes. But yeah. Let's get this motherfucker out of my screen. All right. Let's start wrapping it up, y'all. Look at this. Media enable ignorance in the service of genocide. Rodney Keenan, the electronic Antifada. So y'all see that I'm not just being petty. I can't stand Sam Seder. I can't stand those motherfuckers. But here we go. As Israelis carpet bomb, as Israeli carpet bombing rains death and destruction on civilians of Gaza, the promise of more military support from the U.S. and its Western allies betrays true savagery and inhumanity on behalf of the West. I believe that's supposed to be pro-trace. Yet, as the genocide unfolds in front of our eyes, it is ignorance that has proven to be the greatest weapon against the people of Gaza. As Western governments and Western media cheerlead for the genocide of an entire people by Zionist fanatics, the most chilling aspect of all this is the ease with which Western populists have bought into the frenzy. It is ignorance which has facilitated this barbarism and even encouraged it. Ignorance of the history of the 75-year occupation, ignorance of the daily injustice and persecution faced by Palestinians, ignorance of the arbitrary murder and detention of Palestinian men, women, and children, all which register little, if any, coverage in Western media. It is this historical ignorance that subsequently facilitates the rewriting of history, the racism that celebrates brutality and violence against those deemed inferior, and the hatred that abets the genocide of an entire people with relative ease. It allows governments and media of the West to fabricate stories of mass rapes and beheading of babies, in the knowledge they will be swallowed whole by their gullible publics. Across the West, we are told that Palestinians are the embodiment of evil, while their Israeli occupiers and jailers, who have had their iron heel on the necks of Palestinians for 75 years, are innocent victims of an inexplicable and irrational hatred. And we know this because the leaders of Western governments, those bastions of democracy, freedom, and humanity, have told us so, while simultaneously their media allies have obediently repeated these mendacious charges with a consistent and criminal complicity. The powerful effect of this propaganda machine is undeniable. As we watch the barbarism unleashed on Gaza, the fact that this is being cheered on by so many across the among so many across the West demonstrates the Western establishment's successful conditioning of its citizens, and is disquieting reminder as to how unconsciously indoctrinated the Western public is. This was highlighted in a CNN opinion poll taken on the 12th and 13th of October in the US, which showed that 50% of the American public believes the Israeli government's military assault on Gaza to be fully justified, with another 20% believing it to be partially justified. Only 8% said that the murderous bombardment was unjustified. And you see, when motherfuckers like Bernie Sanders say that Israel has a right to defend itself, this is the consequence. This is the propaganda that they spread. How they indoctrinate the population to Zionism. And while many millions have demonstrated across European cities in solidarity with Gaza and the Palestinian people, it is evident that there is also a significant layer of European population that sympathizes with and supports Israel's ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Mass delusion. This mass delusion has not happened overnight. The ground has been carefully laid out over many years. Bias is reflected not only in the media's presentation of stories, but in the very choice of what stories to comment on. And the establishment's adherence to this deceit ensures their citizens can be convinced that the victim is the bully, that the morally repugnant or horrible innocence, that the morally repugnant are honorable innocents, and that the inhumane and the murderous are the merciful and the virtuous. It also explains Western governments' determined effort to retain their self-appointed role as gatekeeper of all that we should know, as they shut down any alternative voices or social media that exposes their lies. For many, the Israeli-Palestinian war started on the 7th of October. There is no history, no context, no background. It is simply unprovoked attack without right nor reason, perpetrated by those who are evil and who the media tell us are animals. The liberal Zionists depend on your lack of knowledge of history. Their analysis is ahistorical. That's what they that's what they depend on. That's what they depend on. For you not to know the history, for you not to study, and that's why, yes, please like and subscribe to this. But the main objective of this is to encourage y'all to read, to educate yourselves, to study, to combat propaganda. So that's why it always started the day before, right? It always just began. They don't want you to be historically literate. And once these unpeople are dehumanized, the Western populace is further desensitized, and the greenlighting of genocide is assured with little opposition. A history of 75 years of occupation, of brutalization, and murder is buried under the hellscape of thousands of tons of rubble and crushed bones of the occupied, while the West clamors for more. By any measure, the facilitation, the acceptance, and indeed the celebration of genocide across so called quote unquote democratic Western nations will surely rank as the most nefarious achievement of Western governments. Years of consistent and relentless propaganda have led to the virtual brainwashing of vast swaths of its population. Consequently, and disturbingly, the fomenting of widespread and enthusiastic support amongst its citizens for genocide proved relatively easy. Ignorance has seen to that. Ignorance had seen to that. Ignorance had seen to that. They require us to be ignorant in order for them to commit atrocities. He wraps up here, or they wrap up here. So, as leaders of the West and their media signographers, which their Israeli allies ethnically cleansing Gaza, they will doubtlessly feel a huge sense of satisfaction and pride that a significant proportion of their populace is fully behind the butchery. After years of effort, the normalization of genocide has been accomplished. The propaganda, distortion, and omission have led to this day. For Palestinians, our own people, our government, our governments have told us so. Our media has confirmed it, and consequently, they deserve to die. I'm losing my voice a little bit. I apologize for that. But that's a powerful, powerful read. I hope I didn't butcher it enough or too badly. But it's true. They condition us to accept genocide. And colonization plays such a big role on it because I'm seeing a lot of colonized people who, through colonization, through Christianity in its forms, through missionaries, are siding with Israel because they have been stripped of their history. They don't understand how they've been colonized. So, of course, they go with the faith that has been given to them by colonizers and end up aligning with Zionist colonizers. This is why we must refute the colonizers' religion. But let's wrap up here. I'm gonna get like 2 hours of sleep, y'all. 16-hour shifts. My coworkers are gonna hate me, but this is necessary. I've been telling y'all, this guy is, when it's time to go, when it's time to shine, when it's your turn up to bat, if your heart's not in it, if you're not really about it, you will fail. We have seen other individuals combat Piers Morgan's propaganda successfully, and we all cheered on. Unless you're part of his cult, you have to agree that Hasan fell on his face. And the reason why he fell on his face is because he doesn't really believe in any of this. Sure, he said some good things on his stream. He shed some tears on the leftovers. But fundamentally, rhetoric aside, it's your actions that prove whether or not you're an ally, whether or not you're in solidarity with oppressed people, with colonized people, with Palestinians specifically. And the fact that he willingly chose this rich kid who became richer, who steals people's content without credit, who doesn't pay his fucking like producers and shit like that, willingly chose to work with the Zionists and Ethan Klein, willingly chose to work with Hila Klein, who was in the IDF, a literal war criminal, a literal colonizer. Let's hear him just fall face first.
Through diplomacy and propaganda is being played out online. Our next guest has almost 500 million views for his provocative commentary online, making him hugely influential. Hasan Piker streams live under the name Hasan Abi. His analysis of the Israel-Hamas war has taken a highly critical stance towards Israel and Western media, and he's been calling me out for my coverage.
Because he only cares about Israeli citizens. He does not care about Palestinians as human beings. That's why it's apples to oranges. It's like one side is a human, the other side is a barbaric monster child.
I never said that, obviously. He says that he'd like nothing more than to come onto Uncensored and call me a baboon in the suit to my face. Well, here I am, a baboon.
Yeah, he would like nothing more than to get in his face and do that. Why? Because it's going to generate more subscribers for Hasan. It's going to give him more of a prominence. The clout, baby, the clout. And yet he works with the Zionists.
And he can join me now. I'm joined by Hasan. Hasan, thank you very much indeed for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Piers. It's very early here in Los Angeles, California, but I'm going to try to do my very best to not do my British accent while I'm here.
Well, I appreciate that. And listen, I appreciate you coming on. Explain to me.
Yo, by the way, props for having a little bit of that, whatever you want to call it, debate bro fucking knowledge. Immediately, it's early out here. Already saying like, I'm not all there, but hey, I showed up. That's what he wants. He wants points for showing up.
Why you consider me a stenographer for the Israeli government, given that in the last week, I think more than any other host in the world, I have given lengthy platforms to pro-Palestinian voices to articulate that side of the argument.
Let's be very clear. The reason Piers Morgan is doing this is because he's a talentless fucking hack. And nobody else is platforming Palestinian voices. So while he's trying to still spread Zionist propaganda, he needs the fucking ratings. Because he's been fired from how many shows? He's been bouncing around forever. And the only reason people in the States take him seriously is because of his fucking accent. So he has these people on, not to support Palestinians, not to give the other side of it, but to generate clicks for viewerships. Because he's the only one doing it. But not out of righteousness, not out of fair journalism, but for views.
No, I do have to commend you. You certainly have had more pro-Palestinian voices than the rest of the British media and certainly the rest of Western media in general. Now, as far as saying that you're a stenographer, I said that journalists are not supposed to be stenographers. And yet, when it comes down to it, in most circumstances, in whatever conflict we may be in, there are stenographers for whichever party is aligning with the American State Department and the interests of the West in general. And Israel happens to be the one in this ongoing conflict.
It's interesting that you call me a propagandist, because I want to play you. This was your reaction to when the hospital got
I'm
bombed.
a propagandist.
Well, no,
for the record.
No, I'm not calling
I'm a
you that. I'm just saying. I'm going to play you.
I'm saying I am.
Okay, well then,
I'm saying I am.
I just
Before
want
you
to
even play it.
Okay, I'm going to play the clip. This is your reaction to the bomb.
Let's be very clear. Hasan Piker is not a propagandist. Hasan Piker is an opportunist. He's following Cenk Uyghur's, his uncle's playbook. Cenk Uyghur laid it out. He saw an opportunity. Hey, there's a market here that's being untapped because he's a capitalist, right? And I want to be the biggest fish in the pond. I want to be the only one. Check out his Joe Rogan interview. He wants no competition. He wants to squash everybody and just have everything in-house. So this is just an opportunity for him to get his name out there, to make more money. Because just like his uncle, who's a union buster, right, who rages and rags on airport employees, who's shown his fucking true colors when it comes to trans people, quote unquote trans activists, right? He's doing this fucking book tour now, pertaining to run for president when he wasn't even born in the States. They're opportunists. If Hasan Piker was really a propagandist, would he be fucking using kid gloves with Ethan Klein? Would he be working alongside Ethan Klein? Fuck out of here.
bombing of the hospital the other night?
While I was in the process of getting ready for the stream, Israel enacted one of the singular worst strikes they have done thus far, and an Israeli airstrike hit the Al Ahli hospital in Gaza City, where thousands of
clarification, see who's actually to blame before we start passing judgment. You raced in to assume, as many people did, by the way, including the New York Times, BBC, mainstream media, and of course, most of the Arab world then followed, that this was clearly, indisputably, an Israeli airstrike on this hospital. And yet all the evidence now suggests very strongly that it wasn't.
So this is why Piers Morgan's a Zionist propagandist, right? There's one thing that I want to say. It is irrelevant if it was or wasn't an Israeli attack. It was. It was. They've done it before. They warned them that they're going to do it. But here's why it's irrelevant. And this is why when participating in this propaganda war, oftentimes the questions, the way that they're posed, aren't even worth addressing. The only reason why a rocket will go off in Gaza and by a hospital is because Israeli occupation. That's the only reason. So even still, no matter whose rocket it was, no matter what the reason, no matter what happened, and we know what happened, it was Israel. All that is irrelevant because the only reason that people are dying, that Palestinians are suffering, is because of Israel's colonization of Palestine. You want people to stop dying? The Zionists need to go back to Europe, go back to the States, and Israel needs to go exist in Germany, and Palestine needs to be liberated and decolonized.
Not being an Israeli airstrike. And that is expert evidence for people who have no skin in the game at all.
Yes. Well, I don't know which expert you're talking about, because I think Channel 4 did a pretty good job. As a matter of fact, I would say Channel 4 did probably the best job so far in analyzing everything that the IDF has said. But the reason why I believed, and I still do believe, that the likelihood is that this was an Israeli bombing campaign wasn't only because of the singular verifiable video, the phone video from the balcony that had all of the markings of an airstrike. The fact that the Israeli Air Force was enacting a bombing campaign in the region at the time, according to the Al Jazeera live streaming footage that everyone's using but doesn't understand. The fact that the digital media person for the IDF immediately came out and said that this was actually an airstrike that hit a Hamas target, and that he was sad that there were casualties at the end of the day, but this was a Hamas target and celebrated it. And more importantly, I guess, the fact that this hospital had been bombed by Israel. This hospital had been bombed by Israel on Saturday. 22 hospitals have, as a matter of fact, been bombed by Israel since this last saga in the occupation. And this hospital had been bombed directly by Israel, where the cancer ward was destroyed. Israel has been bombing all of these hospitals. Israel has been calling all of these hospitals to evacuate over and over and over again. The medical professionals at the hospital had been called by the Israeli government the day prior, and everyone on the ground assumes that this is an Israeli airstrike. They're the ones who experienced the situation. So when you have every single...
If you watch the BBC account of all this last night, by their Verify unit, which was specifically set up by the BBC to be completely dispassionate in these investigations, and they reached a pretty clear conclusion based on circumstantial evidence, I'll make that clear, that this would not have been an Israeli airstrike, including, for example, the size of the crater, which bears no relation to the size of craters normally by Israeli. So look, my point is, neither of us know for sure. You took to your airwaves immediately because actually your, I wouldn't even say unconscious bias, your admitted propagandist bias on your part was that you wanted that to be an Israeli airstrike. It suited your narrative. And I would say that that in itself, in its way, is being a stenographer. Well, you accuse me of being a stenographer. I try and be fair and get to the truth. In your case, I don't think you try to do that. I think you appeal to your audience, appeal to your base, and you don't really care whether the facts are there or not.
This is entirely unfair because you just said circumstantial evidence favors that this was not an Israeli airstrike. I gave you all of the circumstantial evidence that it does favor that this is an Israeli airstrike. The reason why, however, circumstantial evidence is not enough. And the one thing that I will concede to, because when more information did come out, and no, I do not mean when Israel said that they did not bomb this hospital and it was actually Hamas, and then they turned around and went, never mind, it's not Hamas, it's actually Islamic Jihad. And then they said, we have more evidence coming out in a couple hours. And then the evidence came out, and it turns out it sounded like the phone conversations that they were able to intercept supposedly sounded like by experts at the very least to be completely false and completely made up.
I don't think, in all honesty, I don't think even as you're saying all this, I think you're a smart guy.
Let me finish.
I think you've looked at all of this, and I think in your heart, you know this was probably not an Israeli airstrike.
Look at this. Bro, you're laying everything down. But because you're so chill and relaxed, because this is irrelevant to you, you've already accomplished your goal, which is to be here, to show up. You know that your cultist fans will claim that you won or that you're mistreated or glorify you one way or another. You're not fighting. You don't have to fight. You don't have the fight in you. You're not pushing back. You're rolling over.
That's right. And I'm just curious why
That's-
you would, instead of admitting
No,
that as facts
no,
change,
that is
your
not what I'm
opinion
saying.
changed.
That is not what I'm saying
I
at
don't
all.
understand why you would double and treble down.
You're
when
asking me to be on
evidence
your show.
pointing the
You're
other
asking me to be on your show. Do you want to talk?
Yes.
If you're asking me to be on your show, and I want to be on the show, thank you so much for having me on your show. Let me explain exactly what I said, and let me explain to you why I think still, to this very moment, until there is a third-party investigation that is concluded by the UN, the International Criminal Court, or specifically a forensic analyst that looks at the situation, is allowed to be on the ground. This is not just my perspective. This is B'Tselem as well, which is an Israeli organization that has also demanded a third-party investigation occur. I am not going to conclusively say that this was not
I don't expect
Israel's
you to.
fault.
I don't
Why?
expect you to.
Because I just gave you, and not because I'm a propagandist. As far as me being a propagandist goes, everyone is a propagandist. I'm just honest about it. You're a propagandist. We have our
I'm curious
biases.
who you think I'm
I
a
am at least
propagandist
honest
for.
about my
Who do you
biases.
think I'm a propagandist for?
Who do I think you're propagandist
Yeah.
for? Whichever every media person is doing propaganda.
Who for?
A
I've got to be
fact.
doing something.
You think it's a bad word? I don't. That's just the difference. This is a
I do. I think it's actually quite a serious charge.
conversation.
Hasan, I think it's a serious charge to level, not a podcaster, but as a journalist who's broadcasting around the world, who has a reputation, I believe, for being fair and impartial actually on these issues. It's quite a charge to just say I'm a stenographer of the Israeli government or I'm a propagandist. I don't think there's any evidence I'm either of those things. I'm curious who you think I'm.
While we're having this
propaganda for.
conversation, 3,000.
Look, so you have one or two choices here. You either back up what the fuck you're saying, why you're a propagandist, which will help dispel the illusion that Piers Morgan is somehow objective, impartial, sympathetic to both sides. Since you made the claim yourself that he's a propagandist, be ready to back it the fuck up. Or you do what he does here, where you can't answer because Hasan just speaks out of his ass, doesn't have any supportive, information for his claims, just feeds his fucking audience whatever they want to hear uncritically. So he respectfully, and I'm saying I respect it, turns the conversation back to Palestinians. I respect that. But it's a missed opportunity to reveal, right? To remove Piers Morgan's mask. But again, he doesn't have the fight in him. He doesn't actually believe in any of this.
Piers, while we're having this back and forth, 3,840 Palestinians have been ruthlessly slaughtered in the last incursion into Gaza. I feel like this is an incredibly selfish, self-centered conversation to have. You asked me to be on here. You want to hear my perspective. I'm willing to give it to you. I don't want to talk about I don't want to talk about Noam Chomsky style manufacturing consent conversations about how the media is operating in the behest of capitalism.
Noam Chomsky style, manufacturing consent. Oh my god, dude, this was so full of himself. If you just expose him, literally just address why he's a propagandist, and then just flip it and continue back and recensor the Palestinian people. Because both of those things benefit Palestinians. By exposing Piers Morgan as a propagandist, as a Zionist enabler, that's a victory. And you would have kept this cascade of Piers Morgan being embarrassed going.
There are dead people.
Listen, Hasan, I only asked you because you're the guy that called me a propagandist and called me a baboon in the suit. I was curious as to why. You don't want to say,
I know,
well,
but
I'm doing
I-
propaganda for. Well, move on. I agree. There's a bigger picture. Let's move on. Let's take a short break. Hasan, let's take a short break. I want to come back. I want to talk to you about what happened on October.
Look at that. Look how he drops his head. Oh, man, so fucking defeated.
You're the guy that called me.
There are dead people.
Listen, Hasan, I only asked you because you're the guy that called me a propagandist and called me a baboon in the suit. I was curious as to why. You don't want to say,
I know,
well, I'm
but
doing propaganda for. Well, move on. I agree. There's a bigger picture. Let's move on. Let's take a short break. Hasan, let's take a short break. I want to come back. I want to talk to you about
That head
what
drop.
happened on October 7th. Your reaction to that.
Oh, and the deep breath. Homie has no fight in him. This is a rich kid that got richer. His father was like the vice president of a corporation in Turkey. We go from Sam Seder to Hasan Piker, the two biggest figures on the left that claim to be leftists.
Welcome back. Hasan Piker is still with me. Hasan, I want to play you a clip of something that you said about the October 7th terror attacks, in particular the attack at the music festival, which killed 260 people.
Look at this guy. You know what shouldn't happen? Killing 260 people at a music festival. No, you're right, man. That just happened on its own because bad guys wanted to do bad things. You're right, dude. If they subjugated you to a open air prison your whole life, you're gonna break out eventually when you realize that there's no other way to get out of it.
I mean, it sounds to me there, Hasan, that you are in some way saying they had it coming. Wait.
No, I wouldn't say that they had it coming. I think that
Fucking coward. Fucking coward. What do you say? Yeah, celebrating next to an open air prison, next to a genocidal camp. Yeah, you deserve any and all consequences. Unforeseen. Directly on you.
Michael Brooks used to say, analysis is not.
Michael Brooks. The Michael Brooks reference. Like and subscribe, and we'll get the Michael Brooks candle. We'll spark that shit up every time.
that you are in some way saying they had it coming. Wait.
No, I wouldn't say that they had it coming. I think that Michael Brooks used to say, analysis is not justification. And while obviously civilian casualties and horrific barbaric acts that were committed on October 7th are completely unacceptable, the important thing to make sure that it never happens again is to analyze what are the conditions as to how it happened to begin with. And I think Ehud Barak is going to be on in a little bit as well, or maybe he's on before me. And I'm almost certain that while he has held the keys to the conversation and held the levers of power in this conversation in many key and critical points, I would go so far as to say that he is among many others who also recognize that the Netanyahu administration is responsible. This is not just my assessment. This is 85% of the Israeli population's assessment at the time. This is years and years and years of refusing to negotiate with Palestinian Authority. Don't take my word for it. Take
I would agree.
I would agree. Close our conversation with Likud members. He said that if you want to thwart any kind of Palestinian nation state, you must do everything you can to only negotiate with Hamas. We control how high the fire goes. He's given cash to Hamas by way of Qatar. There's no bigger fan of Hamas than Bibi Netanyahu, which I hope one day you can maybe interview, and then you'll ask him to.
No, I actually did interview him a few months ago, and I did actually spell out to him that there have been a lot more Palestinian deaths this year so far, up to the point of the interview, than Israelis, and what he intends to do about it. He said then,
this is what happens when you don't do your homework. You had to study your enemy. He should have already known that he interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu. He should have referenced that interview and saying you didn't press him enough, etc., whatever, right? Now, this is something that liberals like to do. They did it with Trump, and they're doing it with Benjamin Netanyahu, where they're attempting to make him the real issue, the real problem, is the Israeli right. But yet we've seen Michael Brooks light the candle. We've seen how it was the Israeli left that really established Israel and caused the most damage. It's just now that the right has control. But the perpetrators, the original ones, were leftists, Zionist leftists.
He didn't believe in collective responsibility, which is now this hot phrase in this whole crisis about whether you would hold all people in Gaza responsible for Hamas. Interesting to see if when they do their ground invasion, it'd be interesting to see if they keep to that word. I'm not a defender of what Bibi Netanyahu has been doing in Israel in the last.
The world can't even. All the other cool interviews that we saw that were just bodying Piers Morgan were pushing questions on him to make him uncomfortable, to demonstrate that he's unwilling to answer and to hold an actual position. Most of those he didn't answer. He said, "Oh, that's not. I'm interviewing you." All this bullshit, right? But it's telling. It speaks volumes that he's not willing to answer basic questions. This motherfucker can't even fight to get a question in there.
His attack on the credibility and integrity of the Supreme Court, I think, has been a disgrace, and I think it has fractured society in Israel. I also think that it's caused so much social unrest and had such big protests that you could argue it's taken the eye off the ball of the people who should have been defending the border because they've been trying to sort out what's been going on domestically, internally inside Israel. So I think it's a catastrophic failure of intelligence, of security, of defense, all of those things. I'll be amazed, frankly, if Netanyahu survives this. So I'm certainly not here to defend him, even if you do view me as a stenographer of his government. My question for you, I think, is this: I've had a lot of problems trying to get people on the pro-Palestinian side to separate two things. That you can say, as I believe and you believe, that the Palestinians have been maltreated for decades. That the situation where they are effectively, I don't even call it an occupation because Israelis aren't in Gaza, they called that in 2005, but they still control the ability of Gaza.
I'm just
saying the phraseology is confusing to me because the reality is Israel exercises control over people in Gaza. It allows them in and out. It allows them to turn on the tap of water and so on and so on. I get all that. They don't actually live there because they can't live side by side.
That's why it's called an open air prison.
Right.
That's why they call it the world's largest open air prison.
Hasan, I don't disagree with you, and I've pointed this out for a long time as a journalist. So we don't disagree about the appalling plight of Palestinian people. But the issue comes that if you can't separate that ongoing dispute between Israel and Palestine from the absolutely appalling barbarism of October the 7th, which was on a whole different scale to anything we've seen, where 1,400 people, Holocaust survivors, babies in their cribs, young women taken, tortured, abused, shot, beheaded, it was reported, and so on. If we can't look at that collectively with a general humanity and agreement that is an absolute atrocity, then there's something wrong with this. And I find that the tribalism on both sides is now so toxic and so frenzied that you get people who literally can't. We've had a bunch of actors signing this statement saying they want a ceasefire in Gaza and calling Israel war criminals and so on, but they don't say a word about the Hamas attacks that precipitated this. And I find that really hard to accept.
But you agree?
Damn, he let Piers talk for a good minute.
With them, if they had said, for example, that October 7 attacks were brutal and massacres occurred, and then they said everything else, that Israel is committing war crimes, would you agree with them?
Well, okay, here's what I would honestly say about that. Is Israel not allowed to defend itself from the worst terror attack we've seen since 9/11? Is it not allowed to defend itself after 1,400 people in Israel are butchered in that way? And the question then...
See, first of all, never denounce. We say that, never denounce. Never concede that ground.
If you assume that they are able to defend themselves, as any
the Israeli State Department line, the IDF line, the line that everyone...
Let me ask you this. It then becomes a question of how can they defend themselves? If their mission now is to get rid of...
Bro, just say colonizers can never defend themselves. Because every act that they take is aggression towards indigenous people. It's not complicated. But look at how he's like a pouty fucking teenager getting scolded. Bro, speak the fuck up. Fight, motherfucker, fight.
said you're not
1,400 people in Israel
propagandist.
are butchered in that way. And the question then, if you assume that they are able to defend themselves, as any free
That is the
democratic country, then the
Israeli
question
State
becomes,
Department line, that is the IDF line, that is the line that everyone
let me ask you
shares.
this. It then becomes a question of how can they defend themselves? If their mission now is to get rid of Hamas, a terror organization that's committed one of the worst acts of terror ever seen, if that is their stated aim, then what they are doing is consistent with that, isn't it?
No, here's why this is actually an abject failure, and this is not just my perspective on the matter. I'm just a dumb idiot with a Twitch stream who is live reacting to the news and trying to make sense of everything.
He just wants credit for showing up. That's the only reason second time that he degrades himself, right? Is because he just wants credit for showing up. He doesn't want to be held to a standard or any accountability, to be educated, to be willing to fight, to be willing to argue and stand in solidarity with Palestinians. But what can you expect with a motherfucker who starts a business with a Zionist and an IDF veteran?
It's ongoing. I usually have a policy of not covering breaking news, and sometimes that policy is violated. But ultimately, I'm not held up by the same journalistic standards, even though I think I do a much better job than most other news outlets in general. So let me just say this really.
But the ego saying I do a better job than everybody else, but I'm just a dumb fuck. White dudes, white men, I don't give a fuck where you were born, but white guys, they want it both ways. They want to be infantilized and praised.
Really quickly, you said Israel has a right to defend itself. Absolutely zero people think that this is a ridiculous statement. However, how Israel is defending itself is collective.
Zero people think this is a ridiculous statement. Zero people think it's a ridiculous statement. Anybody that actually supports the liberation of Palestine, the decolonization of Palestine, of the eradication of Zionism, those are zero people. Israel, colonizers, occupiers, cannot, by definition, defend themselves. They are the aggressors. They are the abusers.
Punishment. Now, collective punishment in the form of depriving 2.2 million people of electricity, collective punishment in the form of depriving them of water, of food, collective punishment of in the form of 51 people dying in the West Bank, where there's no Hamas in the West Bank, and yet 51 people have died because in the West Bank, settlers that are occupying Palestinian territory in violation of the international law, settlers who are doing an act of colonial terrorism, and this is not my statement on it, this is international law, that are doing horrifying things by simply just existing there and maintaining the presence with an occupying force in the form of IDF, who is ritualistically humiliating Palestinians in a structure that B'Tselem, an Israeli organization, calls the permanent regime, where every waking moment of Palestinians' lives in the West Bank are absolute hell, where they have no legal recourse. 51 Palestinians have died. And that was before the Ramallah, the Ramallah protest that happened last night. And the Israeli forces were opening up with live fire on protesters last night. So who knows what that death toll has become? This is all a product of Israel being an apartheid state. This is a violent.
Bro, I need to learn how to edit videos, like for reals, because I need to make a video on why I hate how all these fucking liberals, all these opportunists call Israel an apartheid state. I hate the fucking word apartheid at this point. If you call it an apartheid state, you're solely focusing on the unjust laws, the unfair treatment. But you're already foregoing, you've already conceded that it's a colonial state, that its colonization is the real issue. So what you're essentially advocating for when you solely focus on apartheid is that you want it to become the same way that the US and South Africa is, to where the colonizers, the oppressors still maintain the real power, the legislative power, the financial power, the monopoly on violence, right? But the illusion, at least in the books, legally, as the law is written, that there is equality. That's why this apartheid messaging is so appealing to liberals, to opportunists. Because actually say, no, decolonize, liberation, inherently requires violence and force by the oppressed, by the colonized, against the colonizer, against the oppressor. And they can't defend that. Because again, that disrupts the status quo too much. He can't say that because he needs to show up on Leftovers with Ethan Klein, the Zionist fucking super trooper, and the IDF veteran.
Apartheid state. There's no way to be a
Let me
peaceful
ask you
apartheid
this.
state. It is a violence. It is violence required for its maintenance.
Okay, listen.
And that violence is frustrating people.
I hear
That
you,
violence
I
is
hear you.
radicalizing people.
But here's
Hold
my-
on.
I hear
As
you.
far as Israel, as far as what Benjamin Netanyahu has done, as far as the war government, what they have done, Piers, going into Gaza
Yeah.
and bombing Gaza and killing 3,480 Palestinians so far in Gaza. 1,000 plus children out of all of those casualties. 22 hospitals being bombed. A bakery, the only remaining intact bakery, being bombed yesterday. These are horrifying crimes that you would openly say are horrifying and unjustifiable when Russia does it, but when Israel does it, Israel has a right to defend itself. This is identical to the same talking points that I've heard from every Israeli administration official. It's the same talking points that I've heard from American politicians championing the exact same talking points. It's the same thing that I've heard from everyone else in the media. You might have been against the Iraq war, and you use that, but you're using that for evil, in my opinion, at this point. If you are not sitting here and condemning those acts of war crimes, those acts of violence, those acts of collective punishment.
Well, I would say to that I think the death of any child in this conflict is horrific, absolutely horrific. But the question comes down to me.
Bro literally said, all children lives matter.
After an act of terror, as we saw on October the 7th, Israel should be able to defend itself and should be able to go after the people that perpetrated that, who live among civilians in Gaza deliberately. And the question for me comes down to what is proportionate? I don't know the answer, so I'll be honest with you. I don't know what that answer is.
I do know the answer to that. Last night I had Dr. Ofer Kasif, an Israeli Knesset member who was expelled, suspended for 45 days for saying what I believe is the truth, championing the exact same position of the Haaretz's editorial board. There are a lot of thoughtful people, a lot of formative Holocaust scholars, a lot of historians that all agree on the same point. The reason why violence that even penetrates through the Israeli security blanket that people thought existed, that penetrated through that Iron Dome, the Iron Wall, if you want to call it that, is because of years and years of oppression and years of violence, which is a necessity to maintain an apartheid state. And this has to stop. There's only two ways out of this. Either you engage in full-blown ethnic cleansing, and if you listen to the likes of Smotrich, or if you listen to the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir and these very unfavorable, unpopular far-right figures, if you listen to Netanyahu and his
Unpopular, right.
Likud government, they say that they are interested in going in that direction, the ethnic cleansing direction, the ethnic displacement direction, or the only way out of this for a real solution is to move towards peace, to genuinely end the blockade, to end apartheid, to end the occupation, and create a pathway towards citizenship for all people with a right to return, for all 14 million Palestinians, 5 million of which live under Israeli occupation. It's brutal, and then the rest living in diaspora. These are not unreasonable requests. These are requests that understand.
These are not unreasonable requests. Even with my limited knowledge of the history of Israel's colonization of Palestine, it is a ridiculous request because Zionism inherently requires legislative control by Zionists. In order to do that, you must have the numbers. You must have the number of quote-unquote citizens to vote shit forward. You cannot have that if you have a larger Palestinian population. That was the whole quote-unquote Arab question that Zionists had. So yes, it's a ridiculous notion. And that's why when you only address apartheid and not colonialism, excuse me, when you only address apartheid and not colonialism, you end up making stupid fucking statements like it's not a ridiculous statement to ask that the Palestinian population return and be given rights to vote. If they have the right to vote, they're going to vote Zionism away. Why the fuck would a Zionist allow that to happen? Part of its origins of Zionism was to ethnically cleanse the land. First by buying land and then by forcefully removing Palestinians through force, right? Through violence. But he doesn't even recognize that what he's saying is ridiculous.
And the dignity and the humanity of one side, and does not simply treat them as their colonial subjects. And it's the only way to create permanent security and prosperity in the region.
If it was as simple as that, I'm sure that would have happened already. I would say this. I agree with a lot
Bro, this is why this motherfucker lost this bad. The way that Piers just dismisses him. Was Piers able to dismiss the other two pro-Palestinian guests? No. Absolutely not. But he was just like, yeah, that's nice. Anyways.
But what you've just said, not all of it, a lot of it. I don't think you can ever achieve peace now with Hamas controlling Gaza. I don't think you can achieve peace with Netanyahu in charge of Israel, actually, after that.
See, that's the thing. And I don't think Hasan will call him out on this. Because he can't, because it's part of the liberal narrative. It doesn't matter whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu is in power. Whether the quote-unquote extreme far right of Israel or the left of Israel is in power. The objective is the same. The establishment of a Zionist state on Palestinian land. It's not complicated. Shit. We got a troll. Anyways.
his own people will want him to be in charge of Israel down the line when they examine exactly how this happened. But we will see. But Hasan, I'm going to leave it there. It's good to talk to you. You're an important, influential voice for a lot of people. And I think we have a lot of common ground, and there are some things that we disagree about. But I suspect it's not as much as you think. I do think that the core problem here has got to get resolved in a way that's been completely ignored for decades. And until it gets resolved, until the plight of the Palestinian people is resolved, until all these young people in Palestine feel there's some sense of hope and they can get out of what effectively is, as you say, a prison camp, then nothing is going to change. I don't think it justifies I've got to finish it, but I don't think it justifies in any way what happened on October 2nd. But I do agree with you that until that core problem gets resolved, there will never be peace. Sam, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So good. Motherfucker got shut down.
Appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely shut down. And Piers managed to fundamentally win this propaganda battle here by stating at the very end. At the very end, what he states, hey, we have a lot in common. You'll be surprised.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me in that immediate turn. Look at it, just in disgrace. He's like, yeah, I'm fucking over this.
In any way, what happened on October the 7th.
Yeah,
But I do agree
down.
with you that until that core problem gets
Shame.
resolved, there will never be peace. Sam, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bro, that's hilarious. That's fucking hilarious, man. Just a disgrace. What did he think was gonna happen, bro? You're not a fighter, motherfucker. You don't got it in you. You spoiled fucking trust fund kid, man. That fucking golden crib, right? Silver spoon since day one. And plus, you don't even believe in this shit. If you did, if you cared about Palestinians, if you were actually in solidarity with Palestinians, you wouldn't be working with the Zionists and Ethan Klein. That was great. Fucking pathetic piece of shit. Opportunist motherfucker. Look, I gotta knock out. I gotta be up in 3 fucking hours. Do a 16-hour shift. I'm already contemplating how I'm gonna maneuver calling off somehow. But I did promise going over this. So I just want to look. This is what we're gonna dive into next time. I won't pick up a double next week. This is An Army Like No Other, How the Israel Defense Force Made a Nation. This chapter is on the origin and the IDF. These are things that I really want to focus on. I've been going through it. I really enjoyed this read. Look, the prevalence of the military action only makes the inclination for its use more automatic, with failure unlikely to reduce its appeal. When military action does not work, it is seen as an indication that insufficient force was used. So this is the mindset of a militarized society, right? It's like basically, if you're the hammer, everything's a fucking nail. And if nails are still around, then you need a bigger fucking hammer to deal with it. They also go on to state, if in most states the use of military force is the option of last resort, after all, other venues have been exhausted, in Israel, the use of military option comes first, negotiations used only after military options have failed. Meaning, if we can't destroy you, we can't kill you off, then we'll come and talk. They also mention militarism. Militarism has created material interest for the continuation of conflict in Palestine and has become a crucial element of Israeli society. So once you start organizing your society around militarism, you need it to sustain it politically, culturally, socially. It needs to exist. I think again, Abby Martin's underground reporting, interviewing everyday Zionists demonstrates this. When they were calling for the death, these were random people she was interviewing on the Empire Files. We've been through it. So these are just things I want to go over next time a little bit more in depth. But I just wanted to at least pull it up to show, like, yo, I'm trying to do the work here. I really am. They also state Although militarism is socially constructed, there is nothing essentialist about it. In Israeli context, Yuri bin Eliezer argues that, quote, the use of military force acquires legitimization, is perceived as a positive value in a high principle that is right and desirable, and is routinized and institutionalized within society, end quote. We need to probe the specific conditions that created it, essentially meaning they start valuing might makes right. To map Israeli militarism, one must examine Zionist colonization. You see how it's all rooted in Zionist colonization. To talk about apartheid is missing the origins, the actual issue. But a lot of these people, just like Sam Seder, Hasan Piker, Emma Vigeland, right? All these people have conceded that Israel has a right to exist on Palestinian land. A somewhat untypical enterprise that was launched when such projects were winding down, meaning colonization was coming to an end, but since European Jews wanted their own place to establish their force, they were kind of at the tail end of it. That's what we're still dealing with it today. So it's relatively one of the youngest colonial projects. So it should be one of the easiest to dismantle, because we should all be in understanding that this is no longer acceptable. The colony had at least one empire protecting it and claimed a territory for itself not by overt conquest and military might, but by stealth and gradual dispossession of the indigenous population and erosion of its rights. See, so it's over. These quote unquote socialist Zionists were being slick with it. They were just slowly buying up land, or seeming like they were willing to live, as Sam Seder was propagating, willing to live in cohesion, in unison with the indigenous population. But once you start studying, doing the minimal work, you realize like no, this was just part of their patient, their patience waiting for the appropriate time to strike. The move towards military force was used to expand its patrimony with other methods when other methods failed. Zionist narratives use tropes of quote national liberation struggles end quote that have become the accepted history, including the colonial context. So initially, they were very proud and boasting that this was going to be a colonial project, because it was still relatively in vogue. It was at the tail end, but it was still, respected among Europeans that you colonized the land, that you conquered, subjugated, or eradicated the indigenous population. But once that started like fading away from popularity, and once you need to start establishing a acceptable national origin story, that's when you start seeing Zionists adopt the narrative of it being a national liberation struggle. They're saying, "Oh, we actually struggled and liberated ourselves against the British, who, allowed them to conduct these anti-Palestinian campaigns." But not only that it was a national liberation struggle against the Arabs, when they were the ones that they were truly fighting for national liberation. But unfortunately, the Palestinians were trying to be too diplomatic. And we see this a lot with indigenous populations just trying to live, to coexist alongside Europeans. And Europeans are just too fucking greedy and bloodthirsty to allow that to happen. Again, this is why I don't focus on the religious aspect, because whether the Christian, Jewish, right, or whatever sect of Judaism or Christianity, Protestant, whatever the fuck, Catholic, it doesn't matter. Its colonization is for land and resources. That's all it is. But we are going to go over this in more detail. I'm very excited for that. There's a couple books that I was looking through that I have used in the past. This one, not so much, but I do think it's important to emphasize the military aspect of Zionism and how it was necessary to establish a state and to maintain it. Well, I appreciate y'all. I don't know how I'm going to do it. It'll be fine. I have some coffee. A cold brew will be good. Buenas noches. Thank you again. like and subscribe, and we'll get that Michael Brooks candle. Hasta la próxima.